is the same, but overall, here's the way I would look at it, and it's why I like Vertiv from the beginning in terms of an investment. We're only 40 years into the digital age. The industrial age lasted over 100 years. We're only at the beginning of everything that's going to transform digitally over the next 50, 60 years. So we're all in trance right now with AI. It's really just the next step. And when you start to think about how computation evolves and the doubling every 2 years, which everybody's been predicting would stop 10, 20 years ago, it keeps going because you guys get guys like Jensen Huang who come up with GPUs. If you double computing power every 2 years, in 10 years, you have about 32 times the computing power you do today. In 20 years, you have over 1,000 times the computing power you do today. And you've still got quantum coming. You can't even contemplate what that's going to mean, how that's going to change things. So that's why I've loved being in the middle of this with data centers and with Vertiv. This is a long-term trend. All these things that you're going to see, the investments that are being made, yeah, will there be a lull at some point? Probably so. When that comes, tough to know, but I know that trend is there. There's no alternative to a data center for storing information, even for quantum computing.
Yeah, the lack of alternative, I guess, is where it comes back to. I ask this question, and I admit that it's a naive question every single time this comes up, which is, if power supply and capacity is the main constraint, why aren't the smartest people in the world trying to figure out a way where you might be able to navigate around it or reduce the power needs of that computation? I mean, there was a time I remember when people were like, batteries can't get all that more efficient and competitive with ice because it's chemistry. Yeah. People said that. So I don't know if there's longer term, maybe it's beyond the horizon we care about, but is it possible that you're going to end up with more capacity than we need in power?
Boy. Maybe someday.
Yeah.
But for the next 10 years, I have a tough time seeing that.
No, that's the answer, I guess.
And my view of it is, because some people will say data center growth is going to be restricted because you can't get power. I think it's the other way around. With the kind of money involved, the power will show up. Now, it may be gas turbines that are burning energy, there may be more solar, wind, nuclear, whatever. The power will get there. There's just too much money involved. There's too big a trend with the data storage. This has to keep going. So, yeah, it's a problem. Everybody has to work on it, but they will evolve. There's too big. They will find the power. There's just too much demand.
I'd love to get your take on the H-1B visas and the new price of that, sort of the price of entry to work here. For some of the best and brightest, I'm sure your companies need to use these to get the best talent. What's your take on it?
Yeah, any economy to thrive needs the best brain power, and that best brain power empowered to try to become billionaires if they want to, because that's what appeals to human nature, the human psyche, to want to just create, to innovate, to turn yourself or your company or whatever into something. So the countries that do the best job of attracting brain power and giving them the ability to turn into somebody, something, whatever it is they want to do, that's a huge competitive advantage. We ought to be looking at immigration in a way that says, how do we enhance all that brain power in the U.S.? All of this, if you look at economics as a zero-sum game, you want to be restricted. If you look at it and say, no, economics builds on itself, which is a lesson since Adam Smith that we keep learning, it seems, and every year a new group has to learn it and maybe doesn't. But we ought to be trying to get as much brain power in the country as we can. So I'd like to see policies that facilitate getting more brain power wherever it comes from in the world, who wants to come to the U.S. and show, here's who I am, here's what I can do, here's what I'm made of. Those are the folks we want.
Dave, congratulations on CompoSecure. Thanks for sitting down.
Thanks, man.
Wish Jim and David were here, but we'll see you next time.
Nice to see you guys.
David
Nice
Cody.
to see you.
As we're talking, we got some flash PMIs. Let's get to Rick Santelli. Hey, Rick.
Yes, and we see rates slipping a little bit lower and the equities moving a little bit higher. Fed implications there. S&P Global Manufacturing Services Composite coming in weaker than expected for our SEP preliminary view. If you look at the headline, 52.0, that would be the weakest since July, and the last time it was under 50 was in July. If you look at 53.9 on services, that's the weakest level since June, and 53.6 on composite, also the weakest level since June. All three are less than expectations. All three are sequentially lower The good news, at least all three are above 50 in expansion territory. We still have Richmond Fed manufacturing and service indices at the top of the hour. And interest rates, while they're a bit lower on the session, down 3 in a 10-year. Squawk on the Street will return after a short break.
Rick, appreciate that. We're looking at pictures of the President and the First Lady making their way to the UN, where he will address the General Assembly today. Comes on the heels of a bunch of different issues circulating all around the globe, whether that's sanctions against Russia, certainly immigration trends, technology. He's going to have a host of issues to address when he speaks to the Assembly. He'll be preceded, by the way, by the President of Brazil, Lula, where there's been contentious rhetoric back and forth, not just about trade, but sovereignty, sanctions against the Solicitor General and his spouse yesterday. So we'll keep an eye on how all of this is not just voiced by the President, but received in the room.
Yeah. I imagine.
And there's President Lula, as we said, who traditionally speaks before the President of the United States. Meantime, on the heels of that data, Dow's up 280, 5 points away from 6,700 S&P. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the stream. I don't know if this audio is working or not. Looks like we're gonna have a red day. Well, at least as of right now. Yesterday was an interesting day. What happened yesterday? I mean, it just continued. So we had 3 days move up. This is the NASDAQ. We're at all-time highs. I mean, this is ridiculous. We hit 25,000 on NASDAQ. So I thought it was going to roll over, which it was indicating was, but then we had a reversal and it just pushed up to 25,000. I guess they wanted to see 25,000 printed. $25,027. So perhaps today is the day that we might see a reversal, or are we just gonna go sideways? You know, not we need to take this bar out first to go any lower. So we'll see what happens at the end of the day. Because that's what's most important, where we close. But Dow Jones pumping higher, and Russell's pumping higher. So perhaps Russell. I mean, Russell looks bullish still. Let me see here for a second. Yeah, Russell probably wants to visit the all-time highs on the future side because, like I discussed on Sunday, the ETFs, there are all-time highs. I mean, they're, so um, like see, IWM, it's pumping higher. So, where were we? So I think they want to push the futures to the highs. Crude oil, again, like I said, we're just chopping around this flat 200-day moving average. This looked like it was gonna go higher with this green bar because it started right off of the 200 and it cleared all this, but then just completely reversed. And that's where we're sitting, still sitting same place. Gold is pumping higher, 3,800, and so is silver. Silver almost 45 bucks. 2 big days right here, 1 and 2, Friday and Monday. So like I said, everybody's calling for 50 bucks on silver. When is that gonna happen? Um, we'll see. We had Bitcoin. The thing is, that's why I was a little surprised for Nasdaq to be up for the day yesterday when Bitcoin was down with this bar here. It was pretty significant, right? It closed below the moving averages. So we're seeing a little retracement here. We might retest these moving averages and then roll back down. The dollar, I was expecting to go higher, but since the precious metals went higher, dollar just reversed lower. Let's see what it looks like on the weekly. So yeah, so we still might come down a little more, maybe 50% of this bar, the tail. If this tail gets taken out, we're going lower. And there's the bond market. So we had a retracement. Let's hope we stay above this 200. Let's hope we stay above it and have this 20-day moving average push it up. I had a feeling it's going to come down after seeing this red bar. So let's see what the weekly looks like. So we're sitting right above the 50. Now we just need to power up and take out this red bar for the week. That's what I would like to see. Because I want this monthly candle look very strong and close. I mean, the perfect scenario would be like 94 and change above this tail of this bar and this bar. Like 95 would be sweet, right? So that's a it's a long way. 95 from 89 or so. $6. Let's say 95. Yeah, that'll be a huge move. But we still got roughly about 6 days, including today. So it can happen. That's what I would like to see. Um, you have any questions, feel free to put it down in the comment section. I always try to answer all the comments. You're welcome.
President Trump has effectively restored American strength on the world stage and says his historic speech at the United Nations General Assembly will highlight his success in delivering peace on a scale that no other president has accomplished, while simultaneously speaking bluntly about how globalist ideologies risk destroying successful nations around the world. Now, this is the president's first UN address of his second term, and it comes after he shook up the global trading system with dramatic increases in American tariffs earlier this year and shocked many members of the NATO alliance with his treatment of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier this year as well. Now, the president's expected to meet with the Ukrainian leader while in New York today, so we'll see the evolution of that relationship play out. And he's expected to meet with Argentine President Javier Milei today, along with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. They're going to discuss a way forward for the financial markets of Argentina. Not clear if we're going to see a U.S. financial intervention here. Secretary Bessent told reporters yesterday that that's going to depend on market conditions as of this morning. Now, President Trump also has a slew of other meetings today on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, including with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, as we said, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and UN Commission President Ursula von der Leyen are on that list of meetings today. We also expect to see multilateral meetings with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, UAE, and Jordan. So it is going to be a packed schedule this morning. The White House also tells us there's going to be a reception this evening with more than 100 world leaders in New York. Back over to you guys.
Eamon, as we're looking at pictures of President Lula, I'm curious to know what you make of some of the reporting about what he's saying to the General Assembly this morning, namely stressing the importance, in one report's words, of democratic values and national sovereignty, sort of a rebuttal to the U.S.'s attempts to interfere with the Brazilian judiciary.
Yeah, I think, the president is going to hear all that to some extent, but he's going to push forward with his message, which is, one of anti-globalization. And that's what the tariff agenda of this year would suggest. It's sort of America first. And the White House always emphasizes that America first is not always America alone, but it's a much more individualistic, nationalistic approach to the global stage than we've seen from other American presidents. And I think, there's some sense that this room has changed for this president. You remember back in his first term, there was, tittering and chuckling and laughing at President Trump while he was speaking to the UN General Assembly. I don't think there's going to be any of that today. I think this is an assembly that's going to take him very, very seriously, even as he's shaken up all these alliances globally, particularly the transatlantic alliance. And I think there's a lot of people in that transatlantic alliance who are hoping to keep the president sort of within the guardrails of that alliance, particularly on Ukraine, and putting pressure on Russia to get a solution to the Russia-Ukraine war that is favorable to Ukraine and preserves Ukrainian democracy. So I think all that's at stake here, Carl, as we watch this, but we'll see what the president has to say today.
Yeah, and Eamon, for all the retreat from globalism that's been part of the president's message, there is also this talk of reestablishing a military presence in Afghanistan and doing these attacks at sea of what they say are drug traffickers. So it seems like there's a lot there, perhaps, for other members of the UN to react to.
Yeah, and there's some intrigue, guys, this morning as this all happens. We've got this announcement from the Secret Service that they had taken down a secret cell phone network in New York City. They said it was thousands and thousands of SIM cards and basically an entirely fake cell service network that was set up in secret by persons unknown. That they say could have disrupted cell communications in the city during the UN General Assembly. So somebody up to something nefarious in New York, even as all this diplomacy is taking place. The Secret Service said that that system was being used to send threats to senior U.S. government officials, and investigating those threats is what led them to this secret cell network. That kind of intrigue is the backdrop. There's always espionage, and the UN General Assembly is, high season for espionage every year. It's one of the spies, must-do events every year. A lot of espionage for that. But this one is really dramatic, and that takedown coming just the day before this UN General Assembly adds an element of intrigue to all of that. And you do wonder if we'll get some indication throughout the day today as to who was behind that.
Yeah, so dramatic. You imagine the film script is already being shopped. Right. Eamon, thanks very much.
You bet.
Back to markets. Let's bring in Citi U.S. equity strategist Scott Kroner to discuss what we have here, Scott, at record highs again, very resilient tape. Familiar story, right? Elevated valuations by every measure, but when earnings are growing and the Fed is tilted lower with rates, usually that doesn't necessarily lead to bad things. But how do you see it?
Well, there's certainly been a mantra that's come in the market recently with don't fight the Fed with this latest Fed cut. I get that. But to your point, we're looking at very extended valuations, which is an issue and a cause for concern. The way we like to bucket, though, is that it's not the valuation circumstance itself that's the issue. It really keeps coming back to the ability of earnings and fundamentals to justify said valuations. And you look back historically in previous points in time where there's been this much being paid in the market for, let's call it, a new growth paradigm. Usually what brings the bull market to an end is that coming to an end as well, that underlying fundamental premise. That happened with the tech bubble burst. It happened at the end of 2021. So from here, we're in a similar starting point. The question is, how long and persistent can this AI tailwind be in terms of supporting a fairly visible fundamental outlook? As long as we see that visibility, equities are going to be in good shape.
I mean, yesterday, I think NVIDIA added $160 billion in market cap just on this announcement. I mean, it doesn't look like we're anywhere near the end of this AI growth tailwind.
No, I think what we have to be sensitive to, and one of the things that we keep coming back to, is the massive free cash generation that's coming from these companies as their business models continue to mature, right? And you see this revenue conversion down to free cash, it gives these companies just so much financial flexibility. So one of the games that we're going to be watching here is the ability of these companies to continue to moat build, whether it's buying new technologies, whether it's buying potential sources of future demand and so forth. They can do it. They've got the free cash generation to do it. It perpetuates the theme here. It does bring into question in terms of is this going to continue to be a bigger dynamic, and so far the fundamentals are saying that it can stay that way.
I like the way you put that, buying demand, because some of the desk notes are like, we didn't think we'd be this early in the process. We didn't see, I think it was one desk note that said paying people to buy your products. Yeah. Right, that was sort of the knock on yesterday's announcement. Yeah. Does that make any sense?
Well, again, I'm going to put it in this bucket of moat building, right? And the difference here, we keep going back to this tech bubble analogy. Back then, what was happening is that you had a lot of IPO and funding proceeds. That was your source of revenue for doing all of this, right? It created a little bit of a fundamental house of cards. So where one part kind of came unglued, the whole thing tumbled. That's not the case here. These companies are in position to do this. I like to point out that if you look at the Mag 7, okay, as an example, 5 of that Mag 7, despite everything going on with CapEx and everything, are still reducing fully diluted share count. So again, I come back to, you got the financial flexibility to do this, why not?
Yeah, they sort of operate in a world where they don't have painful trade-offs to make, right? There's enough to go around. On the other hand, they are using that free cash flow in large part to rebuild a moat or extend a moat or whatever they might be doing. And I just wonder if at some point there's going to be this realization of, well, part of it is out of desperation or fear that, in fact, what they have right now would otherwise be vulnerable. I can't get around the idea of Meta paying nine figures for talent if they didn't think they were going to be hurt on the other side. We'll get that to another time, Scott.
As we take you to the president.
And I don't mind making this speech without a teleprompter, because the teleprompter is not working. I feel very happy to be up here with you, nevertheless, and that way you speak more from the heart. I can only say that whoever's operating this teleprompter is in big trouble. Hello, Madam First Lady. Thank you very much for being here. And Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, First Lady of the United States, distinguished delegates, ambassadors, and world leaders. 6 years have passed since I last stood in this grand hall and addressed a world that was prosperous and at peace in my first term. Since that day, the guns of war have shattered the peace I forged on two continents. An era of calm and stability gave way to one of the great crises of our time. And here in the United States, 4 years of weakness, lawlessness, and radicalism under the last administration delivered our nation into a repeated set of disasters. 1 year ago, our country was in deep trouble, but today, just 8 months into my administration, we are the hottest country anywhere in the world, and there is no other country even close. America is blessed with the strongest economy, the strongest borders, the strongest military, the strongest friendships, and the strongest spirit of any nation on the face of the earth. This is indeed the golden age of America. We are rapidly reversing the economic calamity we inherited from the previous administration, including ruinous price increases and record-setting inflation like we've never had before. Under my leadership, energy costs are down, gasoline prices are down, grocery prices are down, mortgage rates are down, and inflation has been defeated. The only thing that's up is the stock market, which just hit a record high. In fact, it hit a record high 48 times in the last short period of time. Growth is surging, manufacturing is booming. The stock market, as I said, is doing better than it's ever done. And all of you in this room benefit by that, almost everybody. And importantly, workers' wages are rising at the fastest pace in more than 60 years. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? In 4 years of President Biden, we had less than $1 trillion of new investment into the United States. In just 8 months since I took office, we have secured commitments and money already paid for $17 trillion. Think of it, 4 years, less than $1 trillion, 8 months, much more than $17 trillion is being invested in the United States, and it's now pouring in from all parts of the world. We've implemented the largest tax cuts in American history and the largest regulation cuts in American history, making this once and again the best country on earth to do business. And many of the people in this room are investing in America, and it's turned out to be an awfully good investment during this 8-month period. In my first term, I built the greatest economy in the history of the world. We had the best economy ever, history of the world. And I'm doing the same thing again, but this time it's actually much bigger and even better. The numbers far surpass my record-setting first term. On our southern border, we have successfully repelled a colossal invasion. And for the last 4 months, and that's 4 months in a row, the number of illegal aliens admitted and entering our country has been zero. Hard to believe. Because if you look back just a year ago, it was millions and millions of people pouring in from all over the world, from prisons, from mental institutions, drug dealers. All over the world they came. They just poured into our country with the ridiculous open border policy of the Biden administration. Our message is very simple. If you come illegally into the United States, you're going to jail, or you're going back to where you came from, or perhaps even further than that. You know what that means. I want to thank the country of El Salvador for the successful and professional job they've done in receiving and jailing so many criminals that entered our country. And it was under the previous administration that the number became record-setting, and they're all being taken out. They have no choice. And other countries have no choice because other countries are in the exact same situation with immigration. It's destroying your country, and you have to do something about it. On the world stage, America is respected again like it has never been respected before. You think about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or 1 year ago, we were a laughingstock all over the world. At the NATO summit in June, virtually all NATO members formally committed to increase defense spending at my request from 2% to 5% of GDP, making our alliance far stronger and more powerful than it was ever before. In May, I traveled to the Middle East to visit my friends and rebuild our partnerships in the Gulf and those valued relationships with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE and other countries are now, I believe, closer than ever before. My administration has negotiated one historic trade deal after another, including with the United Kingdom, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and many, many others. Likewise, in a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable. You're never going to get them solved. Some were going for 31 years, 2 of them, 31, think of it, 31 years. One was 36 years. One was 28 years. I ended 7 wars. And in all cases, they were raging with countless thousands of people being killed. This includes Cambodia and Thailand, Kosovo and Serbia, the Congo and Rwanda, a vicious, violent war that was, Pakistan and India, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia, and Armenia and Azerbaijan. It included all of them. No president or prime minister, and for that matter, no other country has ever done anything close to that. And I did it in just 7 months. It's never happened before. There's never been anything like that. I'm very honored to have done it. It's too bad that I had to do these things instead of the United Nations doing them. And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them. I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen. But she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much. And by the way, it's working now. It just went on. Thank you. I think I should just do it the other way. It's easier. Thank you very much. I didn't think of it at the time because I was too busy working to save millions of lives. That is the saving and stopping of these wars. But later I realized that the United Nations wasn't there for us. They weren't there. I thought of it really after the fact, not during. not during these negotiations, which were not easy. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action. Now, after ending all of these wars and also earlier negotiating the Abraham Accords, which is a very big thing for which our country received no credit, never receives credit. Everyone says that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize for each one of these achievements. But for me, the real prize will be the sons and daughters who live to grow up with their mothers and fathers, because millions of people are no longer being killed in endless and unglorious wars. What I care about is not winning prizes, it's saving lives. We saved millions and millions of lives with the 7 wars. And we have others that we're working on, and you know that. Many years ago, a very successful real estate developer in New York, known as Donald J. Trump, I bid on the renovation and rebuilding of this very United Nations complex. I remember it so well. I said at the time that I would do it for $500 million, rebuilding everything. It would be beautiful. I used to talk about, I'm going to give you marble floors. They're going to give you terrazzo. I'm going to give you the best of everything. You're going to have mahogany walls. They're going to give you plastic. But they decided to go in another direction, which was much more expensive at the time, and which actually produced a far inferior product. And I realized that they did not know what they were doing when it came to construction, and that their building concepts were so wrong, and the product that they were proposing to build was so bad and so costly. It was going to cost them a fortune. And I said, and wait till you see the overruns. Well, I turned out to be right. They had massive cost overruns and spent between $2 and $4 billion on the building and did not even get the marble floors that I promised them. You walk on terrazzo. Do you notice that? As far as I'm concerned, frankly, looking at the building and getting stuck on the escalator, they still haven't finished the job. They still haven't finished. That was years ago. The project was so corrupt that Congress actually asked me to testify before them on the tremendous waste of money, because it turned out that they had no idea what it was, but they knew it was anywhere between $2 and $4 billion as opposed to $500 million with a guarantee. But they had no idea, and I said it cost much more than $5 billion. Unfortunately, many things in the United Nations are happening just like that, but on an even much bigger scale, much, much bigger. Very sad to see. Whether the UN can manage to play a productive role, I've come here today to offer the hand of American leadership and friendship to any nation in this assembly that is willing to join us in forging a safer, more prosperous world. And it's a world that we'll be much happier with. A dramatically better future is within our reach. But to get there, we must reject the failed approaches of the past and work together to confront some of the greatest threats in history. There is no more serious danger to our planet today than the most powerful and destructive weapons ever devised by man, of which the United States, as you know, has many. Just as I did in my first term, I've made containing these threats a top priority, starting with the nation of Iran. My position is very simple. The world's #1 sponsor of terror can never be allowed to possess the most dangerous weapon. That's why shortly after taking office, I sent the so-called Supreme Leader a letter making a generous offer. I extended a pledge of full cooperation in exchange for a suspension of Iran's nuclear program. The regime's answer was to continue their constant threats to their neighbors and U.S. interests throughout the region and some great countries that are right nearby. Today, many of Iran's former military commanders, in fact, I can say almost all of them, are no longer with us. They're dead. And 3 months ago, in Operation Midnight Hammer, 7 American B-2 bombers dropped the 14 30,000-pound each bombs on Iran's key nuclear facilities, totally obliterating everything. No other country on earth could have done what we did. No other country has the equipment to do what we did. We have the greatest weapons on earth. We hate to use them. But we did something that for 22 years people wanted to do. With Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity demolished, I immediately brokered an end to the 12-day war, as it's called, between Israel and Iran, with both sides agreeing to fight no longer. As everyone knows, I have also been deeply engaged in seeking a ceasefire in Gaza. Have to get that done. Have to get it done. Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, they have taken so much. This could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now. Thank you. Thank you. As we have got to come together, and we will come together, got to get it done. We have to stop the war in Gaza immediately. We have to stop it. We have to get it done. We have to negotiate, immediately have to negotiate peace. We got to get the hostages back. We want all 20 back. We don't want 2 and 4. As you know, I got, along with Steve Witkoff and others that helped us, Marco Rubio, we got most of them back. We were involved in all of them. But I always said the last 20 are going to be the hardest, and that's exactly what happened. We have to get them back now. We don't want to get back 2, and then another 2, and then 1, and then 3. Have this process. No, we want them all back, and we want the actually 38 dead bodies back too. Those parents came to me, and they want them back, and they want them back very quickly and very badly, as though they were alive. They want them. They want them every bit as much as if their son or daughter were alive. I've also been working relentlessly, stopping the killing in Ukraine. I thought that would be, of the 7 wars that I stopped, I thought that would be the easiest because of my relationship with President Putin, which had always been a good one. I thought that was going to be the easiest one. But, you know, in war, you never know what's going to happen. There are always lots of surprises, both good and bad. Everyone thought Russia would win this war in 3 days. But it didn't work out that way. It was supposed to be just a quick little skirmish. It's not making Russia look good. It's making them look bad. No matter what happens from here on out, this was something that should have taken a matter of days, certainly less than a week. And they've been fighting for 3.5 years and killing anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 young soldiers, mostly soldiers, on both sides, every single week, from 5,000 to 7,000 dead young people, and some in cities, much smaller numbers, where rockets are shot, where drones are dropped. This war would never have started if I were president. This was a war that should have never happened. It shows you what leadership is, what bad leadership can do to a country. Look what happened to the United States. And look where we are right now in just a short period of time. The only question now is how many more lives will be needlessly lost on both sides. China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products, which, as you know, I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't happy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one? In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures. I mean, you're much closer to this. We have an ocean in between. You're right there. And Europe has to step it up. They can't be doing what they're doing. They're buying oil and gas from Russia while they're fighting Russia. It's embarrassing to them. And it was very embarrassing to them when I found out about it, I can tell you that. They have to immediately cease all energy purchases from Russia. Otherwise, we're all wasting a lot of time. So I'm ready to discuss this. We're going to discuss it today with the European nations, all gathered here. I'm sure they're thrilled to hear me speak about it, but that's the way it is. I like to speak my mind and speak the truth. As we seek to reduce the threat of dangerous weapons today, I'm also calling on every nation to join us in ending the development of biological weapons once and for all. And biological is terrible, and nuclear is even beyond, and we include nuclear in that. We want to have a cessation of the development of nuclear weapons. We know, and I get to view it all the time. Sir, would you like to see? And I look at weapons that are so powerful that we just can't ever use them. If we ever use them, the world literally might come to an end. There would be no United Nations to be talking about. There would be no nothing. Just a few years ago, reckless experiments overseas gave us a devastating global pandemic. Yet despite that worldwide catastrophe, many countries are continuing extremely risky research into bioweapons and man-made pathogens. This is unbelievably dangerous. To prevent potential disasters, I'm announcing today that my administration will lead an international effort to enforce biological weapons convention, which is going to be meeting with the top leaders of the world by pioneering an AI verification system that everyone can trust. Hopefully the UN can play a constructive role, and it will also be one of the early projects under AI. Let's see how good it is, because a lot of people are saying it could be one of the great things ever, but it also can be dangerous, but it can be put to tremendous use and tremendous good, and this would be an example of that. Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the #1 political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders. In 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support an estimated 624,000 migrants journeying into the United States. Think of that. The UN is supporting people that are illegally coming into the United States, and then we have to get them out. The UN also provided food, shelter, transportation, and debit cards to illegal aliens. Can you believe that? On the way to infiltrate our southern border. Millions of people came through that southern border. Just a year ago, millions and millions of people were pouring in, 25 million altogether over the 4 years of the incompetent Biden administration. And now we have it stopped, totally stopped. In fact, they're not even coming anymore because they know they can't get through. But what took place is totally unacceptable. The UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them and not finance them. In the United States, we reject the idea that mass numbers of people from foreign lands can be permitted to travel halfway around the world, trample our borders, violate our sovereignty, cause unmitigated crime, and deplete our social safety net. We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stand in defense of their citizens as well. You have to do that because I see it. I'm not mentioning names. I see it, and I can call every single one of them out. You're destroying your countries. They're being destroyed. Europe is in serious trouble. They've been invaded by a force of illegal aliens like nobody's ever seen before. Illegal aliens are pouring into Europe. Nobody is ever, and nobody's doing anything to change it, to get them out. It's not sustainable. And because they choose to be politically correct, they're doing just absolutely nothing about it. And I have to say, I look at London, where you have a terrible mayor, terrible, terrible mayor, and it's been so changed, so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law, but you're in a different country. You can't do that. Both the immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained. What makes the world so beautiful is that each country is unique. But to stay this way, every sovereign nation must have the right to control their own borders. You have the right to control your borders, as we do now, and to limit the sheer numbers of migrants entering their countries and paid for by the people of that nation that were there and that built that particular nation at the time. They put their blood, sweat, tears, money into that country, and now they're being ruined. Proud nations must be allowed to protect their communities and prevent their societies from being overwhelmed by people they have never seen before, with different customs, religions, with different everything. Where migrants have violated laws, lodged false asylum claims, or claimed refugee status for illegitimate reasons, they should, in many cases, be immediately sent home. And while we will always have a big heart for places and people that are struggling and truly compassionate, answers will be given. We have to solve the problem, and we have to solve it in their countries, not create new problems in our countries. And we are very helpful to a lot of countries that are just not able to send their people anymore. They used to send them to us in caravans of 25,000, 30,000 people each. These massive caravans of people pouring into our country, totally unchecked and unvetted. But not anymore. According to the Council of Europe in 2024, almost 50% of inmates in German prisons were foreign nationals or migrants. In Austria, the number was 53% of the people in prisons were from places that weren't from where they are now. In Greece, the number was 54%, and in Switzerland, beautiful Switzerland, 72% of the people in prisons are from outside of Switzerland. When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime, it's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. I can tell you. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. In America, we've taken bold action to swiftly shut down uncontrolled migration. Once we started detaining and deporting everyone who crossed the border and removing illegal aliens from the United States, they simply stopped coming. They're not coming anymore. We're getting a lot of credit, but they're not coming anymore. This was a humanitarian act for all involved, because on the trips up, thousands of people a week were dying. Women were being raped. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Raped, horribly beaten, raped. On the trip up, the journey up, it was a long walk. It was a long, arduous journey, indeed. And it was also a historic victory against human trafficking throughout the region. What we did was a victory, and we saved so many lives of people that wouldn't make the journey. That journey was loaded up with death. Loaded up with death. Dead bodies all along the roads of jungles to get up. They go through jungles, they go through areas so hot you couldn't breathe. They were dying of suffocation, areas so hot that you couldn't breathe. Dead bodies all over. By them not coming, we're saving tremendous numbers of lives. My people have done a fantastic job in doing what they did, and the American public agrees with it. I mean, I was very proud to see this morning I have the highest poll numbers I've ever had. Part of it is because of what we've done on the border. I guess the other part is what we've done in the economy. Joe Biden's policies empowered murderous gangs, human smugglers, child traffickers, drug cartels, and prisoners from all over the world. The previous administration also lost nearly 300,000 children. Think of that. They lost more than 300,000 children, little children, who were trafficked into the United States on the Biden watch, many of whom have been raped, exploited, and abused, and sold. Sold. Nobody talks about that. The fake news doesn't write about it. With many others, young children who are missing or dead. And we found a lot of these children, and we're sending them back, and we've been sending them back to their parents. They said, nobody knows who they are. They said, where do you come from? And they'll give us a country, and we'll find out, and we'll figure it out, and we'll bring them back to their homes. And the mother and father rush to the door, and their tears in their eyes. They can't believe that they're seeing their son or daughter, their little son or daughter again. We've done almost 30,000 of them so far. Any system that results in the mass trafficking of children is inherently evil. Yet that is exactly what the globalist migration agenda has done, and it's what it's all about. In America, those days, as you know, are over. The Trump administration is working, and we are continuing to work to track down the villains that are causing this problem, and also, as I said, to get back the 30,000 we've already returned. Now I think we're going to have another. We're going to find a lot. You're not going to find all of them. 300, more than 300,000. They're lost or they're dead. They're lost or they're dead because of the animals that did this. To protect our citizens, I've also designated multiple savage drug cartels as far as and you see this, and you see it happening right before your eyes. Let's put it this way. People don't like taking big loads of drugs in boats anymore. There aren't too many boats that are traveling on the seas by Venezuela. They tend not to want to travel very quickly anymore. And we've virtually stopped drugs coming into our country by sea. We call them the water drugs. They kill hundreds of thousands of people. I've also designated multiple savage drug cartels as far as foreign terrorist organizations, along with two bloodthirsty transnational gangs, probably the worst gangs anywhere in the world, MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. Tren de Aragua is from Venezuela, by the way. Such organizations torture, maim, mutilate, and murder with impunity. They're the enemies of all humanity. For this reason, we've recently begun using the supreme power of the United States military to destroy Venezuelan terrorists and trafficking networks led by Nicolas Maduro. To every terrorist thug smuggling poisonous drugs into the United States of America, please be warned that we will blow you out of existence. That's what we're doing. We have no choice. Can't let it happen. They're destroying. I believe we lost 300,000 people last year to drugs, 300,000. Fentanyl and other drugs. Each boat that we sink carries drugs that would kill more than 25,000 Americans. We will not let that happen. Energy is another area where the United States is now thriving like never before. We're getting rid of the falsely named renewables. By the way, they're a joke. They don't work. They're too expensive. They're not strong enough to fire up the plants that you need to make your country great. The wind doesn't blow. Those big windmills are so pathetic and so bad, so expensive to operate. And they have to be rebuilt all the time, and they start to rust and rot. Most expensive energy ever conceived, and it's actually energy. You're supposed to make money with energy, not lose money. You lose money, the governments have to subsidize. You can't put them out without massive subsidies. And most of them are built in China, and I give China a lot of credit. They build them, but they have very few wind farms. So why is it that they build them and they send them all over the world, but they barely use them? You know what they use? Coal. They use gas. They use almost anything, but they don't like wind. But they sure as hell like selling the windmills. Europe, on the other hand, has a long way to go, with many countries being on the brink of destruction because of the green energy agenda. And I give a lot of credit to Germany. Germany was being led down a very sick path, both on immigration, by the way, and on energy. They were going green, and they were going bankrupt. And the new leadership came in, and they went back to where they were, with fossil fuel and with nuclear, which is good. It's now safe, and you can do it properly. But they went back to where they were, and they opened up a lot of different plants, energy producing plants, and they're doing well. I give Germany a lot of credit for that. They've said this is a disaster, what's happening. They were going all green. All green is all bankrupt. That's what it represents. And it's not politically correct. I'll be very badly criticized for saying it, but I'm here to tell the truth. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'm in New York City. I'm feeling a lot safer. Crime, we're getting crime down. And by the way, speaking of crime, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was the crime capital of America. Now it's after 12 days, it's a totally safe city. Everyone's going out to dinner. They're going out to restaurants. Your wife can walk down the middle of the street with or without you. Nothing's going to happen. My people have done a fantastic job. And yes, I called in the National Guard, and the National Guard took care of business, and they weren't politically correct, but they took care of business. We got 1,700 career criminals out, brought them back to where they came from, the countries where they came from, or put them in jails. Washington, D.C. is now a totally safe city again, and I welcome you to come. In fact, we'll have dinner together at a local restaurant, and we'll be able to walk. We don't have to go by an armor-plated vehicle. We'll walk right over there from the White House. They've given up their powerful edge, a lot of the countries that we're talking about, in oil and gas, such as essentially closing the great North Sea oil. Oh, the North Sea, I know it so well. Aberdeen was the oil capital of Europe, and there's tremendous oil that hasn't been found in the North Sea. Tremendous oil. And I was with the Prime Minister I respect and like a lot, and I said, you're sitting with the greatest asset. They essentially closed it by making it so highly taxed that no developer, no oil company can go there. They have tremendous oil left, and more importantly, they have tremendous oil that hasn't even been found yet. And what a tremendous asset for the United Kingdom. And I hope the Prime Minister is listening, because I told it to him 3 days in a row. That's all he heard. North Sea oil, North Sea, because I want to see them do well. I want to stop seeing them ruining that beautiful Scottish and English countryside with windmills and massive solar panels that go 7 miles by 7 miles, taking away farmland. But we're not letting this happen in America. In 1982, the executive director of the United Nations Environmental Program predicted that by the year 2000, climate change would cause a global catastrophe. He said that it will be irreversible, as any nuclear holocaust would be. This is what they said at the United Nations. What happened? Here we are. Another UN official stated in 1989 that within a decade, entire nations could be wiped off the map by global warming. Not happening. You know, it used to be global cooling. If you look back years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world. But then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that. No more global warming, no more global cooling. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong. They were made by stupid people that have cost their countries fortunes and given those same countries no chance for success. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. And I'm really good at predicting things, you know. They actually said during the campaign they had a hat, the best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail. And if you don't stop people that you've never seen before, that you have nothing in common with, your country is going to fail. I'm the president of the United States, but I worry about Europe. I love Europe. I love the people of Europe. And I hate to see it being devastated by energy and immigration. This double-tailed monster destroys everything in its wake, and they cannot let that happen any longer. You're doing it because you want to be nice. You want to be politically correct, and you're destroying your heritage. They must take control strongly and immediately of the unmitigated immigration disaster and the fake energy catastrophe before it's too late. The carbon footprint is a hoax made up by people with evil intentions, and they're heading down a path of total destruction. You know, the carbon footprint was a big, big thing a few years ago. I remember hearing about the carbon footprint, and then President Obama would get into Air Force One, a massive Boeing 747, and not a new one, an old one with old engines that spew everything into the atmosphere. He'd talk about the carbon footprint, we must do so. Then he'd get in and he'd fly from Washington to Hawaii to play a round of golf. And then he'd get back onto that big, beautiful plane and he'd fly back and he'd talk about, again, global warming and the carbon footprint. It's a con job. At extreme cost and expense, Europe reduced its own carbon footprint by 37%. Think of that. Congratulations, Europe. Great job. You cost yourself a lot of jobs, a lot of factories closed, but you reduced the carbon footprint by 37%. However, for all of that sacrifice and much more, it's been totally wiped out and then some by a global increase of 54%. Much of it coming from China and other countries that are thriving around China, which now produces more CO2 than all the other developed nations in the world. So all of these countries are working so hard on the carbon footprint, which is nonsense, by the way. It's nonsense. You know, it's interesting. In the United States, we have still radicalized environmentalists, and they want the factories to stop. Everything should stop. No more cows. We don't want cows anymore. I guess they want to kill all the cows. They want to do things that are just unbelievable, and you have it too. But you know, we have a border, strong, and we have a shape, and that shape doesn't just go straight up. That shape is amorphous when it comes to the atmosphere. And if we had the most clean air, and I think we do, we have very clean air. We have the cleanest air we've had in many, many years. But the problem is that other countries, like China, which has air that's a little bit rough, it blows. And no matter what you're doing down here, the air up here tends to get very dirty because it comes in from other countries where their air isn't so clean. And the environmentalists refuse to acknowledge that. Same thing with garbage. In Asia, they dump much of their garbage right into the ocean. And over about a 1 week and 2 week journey, it flows right past Los Angeles. You've seen it. Massive amounts of garbage, almost too much to do anything about. flowing past Los Angeles, past San Francisco, and then somebody would get in trouble because he dropped a cigarette on the beach. The whole thing is crazy. The primary effect of these brutal green energy policies has not been to help the environment, but to redistribute manufacturing and industrial activity from developed countries that follow the insane rules that are put down to polluting countries that break the rules and are making a fortune. They're making a fortune. European electricity bills are now 4 to 5 times more expensive than those in China, and 2 to 3 times higher than the United States. And our bills are coming way down. You probably see that our gasoline prices are way down. You know, we have an expression, drill, baby, drill, and that's what we're doing. We're going to be much lower in a year from now. But they've come way down over the last year. As a result, every air conditioner is like very uncommon to see one in some of these countries because the electric costs are so high. So while the U.S. has approximately 1,300 heat-related deaths annually, that's a lot, Europe loses more than 175,000 people to heat deaths each year because the costs are so expensive you can't turn on an air conditioner. What is that all about? That's not Europe. That's not the Europe that I love and know. All in the name of pretending to stop the global warming hoax. The entire globalist concept of asking successful industrialized nations to inflict pain on themselves and radically disrupt their entire societies must be rejected completely and totally, and it must be immediate. That's why in America I withdrew from the fake Paris Climate Accord, where, by the way, America was paying so much more than every country. Others weren't paying. China didn't have to pay until 2030. Russia was given an old standard that was easy to meet, a 1990 standard. But for the United States, we're supposed to pay like $1 trillion. And I said, this is another scam. The fact is, the United States has been taken advantage of by the world for many, many years, but not any longer, as you probably noticed. I unleashed massive energy production and signed historic executive orders to hunt for oil, but we don't have to do much hunting because we have the most oil of any nation anywhere, oil and gas in the world. And if you add coal, we have the most of any nation in the world. Clean, I call it clean, beautiful coal. You can do things today with coal that you couldn't have done 10 years ago, 15 years. So I have a little standing order in the White House. Never use the word coal, only use the words clean, beautiful coal. Sounds much better, doesn't it? But we stand ready to provide any country with abundant, affordable energy supplies if you need them, when most of you do. We're proudly exporting energy all over the world. We're now the largest exporter. In the United States, we want trade and robust commerce with all nations, everybody. We want to help nations. We're going to help nations. But it must also be fair and reciprocal. The challenge with trade is much the same with climate. The countries that followed the rules, all their factories have been plundered. It's really sad to watch. They've been broken. They've been broken by countries that broke the rules. That's why the United States is now applying tariffs to other countries, and much as these tariffs were for many years applied to us, uncontrollably applied to us. We've used tariffs as a defense mechanism under the Trump administration, including my first term, where hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs were taken in. And by the way, we had the lowest inflation, and now we have very low inflation. The only thing different is that we have hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into our country. But this is how we will ensure that the system works for everyone and is sustainable into the future. We're also using tariffs to defend our sovereignty and security throughout the world, including against nations that have taken advantage of former U.S. administrations for decades, including the most corrupt, incompetent administration in history, the sleepy Joe Biden administration. Brazil now faces major tariffs in response to its unprecedented efforts to interfere in the rights and freedoms of our American citizens and others, with censorship, repression, weaponization, judicial corruption, and targeting of political critics in the United States. I have a little problem saying this because I must tell you, I was walking in and the leader of Brazil was walking out. We saw him and I saw him, he saw me, and we embraced. And then I'm saying, can you believe I'm going to be saying this in just 2 minutes? But we actually agreed that we would meet next week. We didn't have much time to talk, like about 20 seconds. They were in retrospect, I'm glad I waited because this thing didn't work out too well. But we did talk, we had a good talk, and we agreed to meet next week, if that's of interest. But he seemed like a very nice man, actually. He liked me, I liked him. But if you, and I only do business with people I like. When I don't like them, I don't like them. But we had, at least for about 39 seconds, we had excellent chemistry. It's a good sign. But also in the past, Brazil, can you believe this, unfairly tariffed our nation, but now because of our tariffs, we are hitting them back, and we're hitting them back very hard. As president, I will always defend our national sovereignty and the rights of American citizens. So
nation, etc.
NBC Plus.
Let's bring it.
Thank you, Carl and Courtney. Welcome to the Halftime Report. I am Frank Holland, in for the judge, Scott Wapner. Front and center at this hour, the fate of the record rally as we await Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He is speaking at the bottom of this hour. We're going to bring you his comments live, and our investment committee is right here, ready to go. Join us for the hour. We got Josh Brown, Joe Terranova, and Jim Leventhal. Before we get the conversation started, quick check on the markets. Remember, we hit record highs yesterday for the S&P and the NASDAQ. Bit of a pullback today. The Dow's fractionally higher. The S&P pulling back fractionally. The NASDAQ, the hardest hit, pulling back just about 1/3 of 1%. And really, Joe, that's where we got to start. One ETF I know you follow very closely, the Momentum ETF. It also hit a record high yesterday. So we've seen a lot of momentum in this market. What is this pullback today about? This very slight pullback, again, from a couple dozens of record highs this year.
I'm seeing it a little bit differently. I'm seeing it from the perspective of it seems as though we're vacillating from day to day, back and forth between the Mag 10 and the 490 plus. So if you look at today's tape, okay, the participation from NVIDIA and some of the other Mag 10 names, it's not present, But guess what? We have our Fin 5 back again. All of the 5 money center banks making new 52-week highs. So it goes back today to talking about it's almost like the odd and even day. I don't know that either of you remember, but back in the 70s, you had the odd and even day when you could get gas. That's what it feels like. It's like one day it's the Mag 10, the other day it's the 490 plus. And I think if we continue to have that type of pattern, the calendar works in your favor as we move towards the end of the year. If you're thinking we're at some inflection point for the market, you don't want to push up against that. You don't want to fight it because the trend right now is in the direction of continuing to move higher.
I want to pull on this odd even day thread. So you're saying this is, I guess, the odd day. The even day may be the big tech day. Is that why an NVIDIA is pulling back about 3%? A Vistra pulling back more than 3%. There was a downgrade as well. I just want to factor that in. A Super Micro pulling back about 4.5%. You're just saying it's just the rotation of investors right now. And that's why we see the S&P equal weight actually positive. Energy leading. It's just a rotation.
Yeah, we've had that pattern now in place for the last several weeks, and we had a very strong day yesterday related to the news which we broke on air here regarding NVIDIA and OpenAI, and the entirety of the AI halo benefited from that. Certainly the utility names that you mentioned, Constellation Energy, Vistra, even some industrials like Eaton, they participated as well. So you're just getting a little bit of mean reversion off of what was a really strong performance day yesterday.
Josh, you seeing it the same way? Simply mean reversion, kind of pulling on Joe's thesis here. Odd even day like he saw back in the 70s when it was during the gas crisis. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. And it's just simply investors are rotating out, I guess, on emotion. A little bit of animal spirits in the market as it trades a record high. Another thing I want to point out, we see the S&P High Beta ETF also very close to its all-time high, along with the Momentum ETF. So investors are clearly looking. They're looking for some opportunity for gains at a market trading very close to highs.
Yeah, so Joe's right. That's a good encapsulation of the day-to-day. But our message as a wealth management firm to investors over the last 12 years has always been to ignore the day-to-day. There's not always a new story to tell. There's not always a rotation. There's not always some change worthy of chasing. If you pull back the lens and look at the big picture of the bull market we've been in for large cap tech, you recognize that not every moment has been a great moment to be there, but you've had to be there overall. You can't not be in these stocks. NVIDIA and Apple are now 14% of the S&P 500. That is their highest combined weighting ever. People look at that and think it's unprecedented because they haven't seen a chart of GE and AT&T a few decades back. People think that it's some bizarre anomaly that the Mag 7 is 35% of the S&P 500 because they don't understand the history. Every bull market has had concentrated winners at the top. It's almost a hallmark of how you know you're in a bull market when there's leadership. It's not that bizarre. It might be more pronounced than ever in history, but we're always setting new records for this thing or that thing. The point that people need to understand is this is being driven by earnings. The information technology sector has the largest percentage increase in estimated earnings for Q4 of all sectors since June. And that's why these stocks are ripping. The year-over-year expected earnings rate is 20.4% for these stocks. Why wouldn't they be the biggest? Why wouldn't there be concentration? NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft, your three biggest names, are also, drum roll, the largest contributors to the increase in expected earnings for the last quarter of the year. And second place is communications. So, look, that's why these stocks are working. It's why they've been working. They're anomalous throughout history, only in the sense that we have never had companies this large be able to sustain double-digit growth rates for this long at massive, almost unprecedented profit margins year after year after year. This starts in 2016. It's 9 years of this. This year will be 10. So that's what's going on with this segment of the market. Now, you want to tell me, yeah, but tomorrow is going to be, a value rotation. Okay, fine. Have fun. Chase the value rotation. You must have these names in your portfolio. Thank God most people listening to me do.
All right,
Yeah,
fair enough.
I agree with you, Josh. And what I'm not just saying is you're making a binary choice. What I'm actually doing is I'm just providing the evidence for those that believe the market is rich, we're at some inflection point for the market. The run up yesterday, NVIDIA takes you to an extreme level. What I'm saying is when you have that continued daily rotation between one sector and another, that's not a sign. That's not evidence of an inflection point. I completely agree with your assessment of technology. Technology is mandatory to have in your portfolio right now. But what I'm speaking towards really is let's not make this a binary choice, one or the other. Let's have it be about the fact that it supports the premise that this is a strong bull market.
All right, so we're seeing a widespread consensus. And Jim, I want to get in. We're always asking you to be patient, but you're never rewarded for that patience here on Halftime, in all fairness.
You've got two talented people here giving us gospel.
We have
I want to synthesize what they're saying. I know you're going to ask me a question.
I do want to ask you a question.
Can I just say what I want to say?
Go ahead and ask and say what you got.
Look, I'm listening to listening to what you said, Joe, and Josh, what you just said. And what if, for the foreseeable future, it's no longer the 493 versus the 7? Because I think that's really what we're saying here. What if it's not the 490 versus the 10? What if it's the whole market? What if you've got fundamental reasons, as Josh, you just laid out for the technology trade, but that also extends to the rest of the market? I mean, we've got GDP that's growing at 3.3%. We've got margins, corporate margins that are very high and going higher. The fears of the tariffs crushing margins, it just isn't showing up. The fear of the tariffs crushing consumption, it just isn't showing up in retail sales. So, if I take a look at a segment of the market, and Josh, I hear you. Let's not do this thing where every day, hey, now we're going to talk about small caps, but give me just a moment to talk about small caps, because from a fundamental point of view, what I'm seeing here is the S&P 600 earnings per share growth is projected in the fourth quarter to match that of the S&P 500. And even more going into 2026, the S&P 600 small caps is expected to exceed earnings growth of the S&P 500. My point being here is that there is fundamental reasons, as you were saying, Joe, for the market overall to continue higher. And you don't have to, Josh, your point is excellently made. You don't have to do this game of today I'm going to be in Palantir and tomorrow I'm going to be in ExxonMobil. It is a broad market rally. It is continuing. Yes, the S&P 500, the market cap has exceeded the equal weight so far this year, but they're both working right now. Just be in it and enjoy it.
All right, Jimmy making a passion play for the small caps. I think you were actually making a point I was going to make. There might be some reasons for the broadening. In fact, again, we're waiting for Jay Powell to speak in just about a half an hour from now. So the tone that he sets may lead more investors to think there's at least those two cuts coming, or maintain the conviction there's at least those two cuts coming, and could spur some more broadening. But we want to focus more.
I don't think we need the cuts.
Exactly.
I think Josh's point, this is about profit margin expansion. This is about strong earnings. I mean, tell me if we see deterioration in the earnings, and then, okay, the market has a problem. Then for those that are pushing up against an extreme valuation and the fact that we haven't had a big correction, okay, now you've got some evidence. I don't think it's
But hasn't the dovishness been the catalyst for some of these record highs we've seen over just the last couple of days? I mean, markets hitting highs days after days. That hasn't been at all a catalyst?
I think more than anything else, what the rate cut in September did is it kind of pushed against the narrative that historically September is a weak month. I think it allowed for a little bit of an awakening from small caps for sure. Some areas of the market that appeared to be unappealing earlier in 2025, they got a lift from that. I think that's more sentiment than anything else. But I don't think it's a requirement that you get two more rate cuts for the rally to keep going.
All right, well, we're going to continue this conversation in just a minute. We want to go back to tech. NVIDIA coming off its best day since July after announcing plans to invest up to $100 billion in OpenAI as part of the data center build-out. Our Mackenzie Segala just caught up with OpenAI's CFO and joins us now with more. Mac.
Frank, I'm here in Abilene, Texas, at the epicenter of OpenAI's ambitious Stargate project. CFO Sarah Fryer telling me in an exclusive interview a short time ago that the bottleneck, it's not money, it is power. OpenAI has reviewed upwards of 800 potential sites across North America, weighing land, substations, and transmission. She said that she said equity is too expensive. The company is looking to debt to finance this expansion, and even nuclear, it is on the table here to meet demand alongside renewables like all the wind and solar power that you see behind me. Now, I also asked Sarah how the financing really works when it comes to partners like Oracle and NVIDIA.
Folks like Oracle are putting their balance sheets to work to create these incredible data centers you see behind us. And once those are online, we will pay for those as OPEX. In NVIDIA's case, They're putting together some equity to get it jump-started, but importantly, they will get paid for all those chips as those chips get deployed.
Now, Fryer also stressing to me that OpenAI will not just be relying on partners like Oracle. The company will build its own first-party infrastructure because with that, they get to gain pricing leverage and protect valuable intellectual property. She compared this to when Amazon decided to build out AWS instead of relying on IBM servers. Frank?
Mackenzie Sagalos, live in Abilene, Texas. Mac, thank you very much. Taking a look at Oracle and NVIDIA shares moving lower right now. For more on NVIDIA's OpenAI investment, head over to CNBC Pro with a look at how some investors are worried the news is raising some red flags and it could be a bubble. You see the headline right there. Josh, I'm going to come to you with this one. JP Morgan, in fact, out with a note about this NVIDIA OpenAI announcement, saying in part it's rarely a good thing when a company funds purchases of its goods by direct customers. And some are going so far as to say we're at the end of the build-out phase when companies have to, quote-unquote, pay people to buy their stuff. How are you seeing this, and how are you seeing some of the commentary from Sarah Fryer we just heard from Mackenzie Sagalos?
So it's a great question, Frank. Thank you. And Joe and Jim both have a similar tenure than I do, and we were all around for this thing that went on in 1999 and 2000, which was vendor-financed technology purchases. And in fact, when that became basically the way companies were hitting their numbers or selling their IPOs on Wall Street, it did not end well. So it's a legitimate concern. Basically, we had this thing with telecom and technology, and we had vendor-financed sales of equipment. We had these competitive local exchange carriers, or CLEX or CLEX, we used to call them. There was a new one coming public every week. Basically, each one of these thought they were going to build their own version of AT&T, but with fiber optics. And a lot of the way that servers were being sold and routers and switches into that environment was basically like, here's the money, buy X amount of equipment, we'll do the financing for you, and then we'll kind of round trip it when your earnings are due, et cetera. It was like it was like the tail end of that particular boom. I don't think that that's a perfect comparison. And the thing about when you need your customers to buy, that doesn't really sound like it's the same thing as what I just described, as is taking place right now. These investments are going to be made anyway. These data centers are going to be built out anyway. And whether one player wants to have a bigger investment than another player, it's not we need to do this in order to make our numbers. It's like, no, strategically, we want to be part of this project. In the case of NVIDIA, you're talking about a $4 trillion and change company making a $100 billion investment over multiple years with an obvious ROI attached to an investment like that if it leads to GPU sales and services revenue. It's a little bit different than what we've seen in prior CapEx booms. So I won't say it's totally unfounded concern. I would just say it's not quite as dire as that rhetoric makes it sound.
I want to go to the back end of that headline we just showed, whether or not this is a bubble. There was a Bain report out today saying by 2030, there's going to be $800 billion of a revenue shortfall for these AI companies, based on the investments that they're making right now. Jimmy, you're wincing a little bit.
I'm giving a wry smile.
Is that potentially one of the reasons you think we may see an NVIDIA pulling back today and Oracle pulling back today? This report, again, from Bain, $800 billion revenue shortfall. In all fairness, it's in 2030. I do want to point out it's in 2030.
I want to be careful about the parable of the grasshopper and the ant, but 2030 is a long way away.
Well, it's a long way and a short way away.
No, it's a long way away. I mean, it just is. I think maybe a different way of answering your question or rephrasing your question is, will there come a point in time where the AI trade is a bubble? Almost certainly. Is it now? Almost certainly not. I don't know what inning we're in, third, sixth, but we're not in the ninth inning here. Josh pointed out what was going on in the tech telecom boom of the late 1990s. But as he points out, and as I'm going to repeat slightly differently, there's a question about whether this money being spent is being spent on productive return on investment types of projects, or if we're just laying down dark fiber optics as we were doing in the lower end of Manhattan. I saw it all day long. You dig up the street, lay fiber optics, pave it over, and do it the next day. I mean, literally the next day. And you end up with a lot of unproductive capacity capacity. That's just not where we are in this trade right now. So to the other side of this, I look at the announcement between OpenAI and NVIDIA yesterday, and I say to myself, great. NVIDIA is enjoying exorbitant profit. Yeah, I'll call it that, but I don't mean it in an accusatory fashion. It's enjoying exorbitant profit, and it's recycling it back into the ecosystem, which is the means by which Oracle is going to get paid for what it's doing with OpenAI. It's a virtuous cycle now. Will it at some point become unvirtuous? Yes. If that's 2030, I'm sorry if this makes me the grasshopper. I'm not usually like this, but I'm not going to worry about it in 2025.
Yeah, I think we take psychologically in the financial services industry, we take things to an extreme. We immediately say it's a bubble, or it's a raging bull market. Bubbles are built upon leverage. I'm not sure what we're doing right now is building upon leverage as it relates to infrastructure surrounding AI. In the 90s, we were building that innovation upon leverage. I think this is something different. And I think you have to be honest with yourself and say, look, would you be surprised if you woke up 6 months from now and NVIDIA is trading $145 or $150? I don't think any of us here would be surprised by that. I think that's a natural correction or a natural moderation in the market. That's not necessarily a reason to move away from the position. All that's really doing is setting an expectation and saying to yourself, this in fact could happen in the future. It doesn't defeat the premise that we have a very strong thematic investing AI story that's currently unfolding. I think it's more just about, okay, set your expectation, understand this could go either way in the next 6 to 9 months, but overall the 30,000-foot view is a very compelling and strong one.
All right, Jimmy, you want to throw a tag on that?
I think Joe just made a great point when you used the word leverage. It made me think about, I am a bit of a disciple of Ed Yardeni. I think he gets it right when he says, where do recessions occur? When does the economy go awry? He points out that it's not because the Fed raises rates. That's not the condition we're in right now, obviously. But it's when the banking sector gets into trouble. It's when the banking sector gets into trouble, perhaps because the Fed raised rates, and they can no longer lend. We are clearly, to your point about the Fin 5, Joe, we are clearly very far from any difficulties in the banking sector. And that would indicate to me that this AI cycle that we're going through and this overall economic cycle has legs.
Wait, you're talking about the overall economic, so we got to dig into that for a second. A lot of this economic cycle has been held up by the AI boom. Jay Powell said it. A lot of notes out today saying it included Deutsche Bank talking about NVIDIA and the AI capex boom. They say in part currently carrying the weight of U.S. economic growth. The bad news is that in order for the tech cycle to continue and contribute to GDP growth, capital investment needs to remain parabolic, and that's highly unlikely. So it doesn't have to be a bubble, but if it slows down, doesn't that slow down the economy? Doesn't that slow down the ability of these companies to make...
That's natural, though.
Well, I agree, but like I said, their estimate has to be parabolic. I think all of you are saying,
I don't think
and
it has to
including
be
you,
parabolic.
Joe, there's room between a raging bull market and a bubble, but where in that continuum does this trade slow down significantly and become an issue when investors are really paying up for a lot of these names?
Where's the inflection point, I think, is what you might be searching for. And I don't think anyone, I think the truth, I've been doing this a long time, I don't think anyone can identify the inflection point. You only really see the inflection point after it occurs. And unfortunately, that's just the reality of what we do in this business. I think what's important is how do you react to the appearance of the inflection point. That's where a lot of people get into trouble because they remain skeptical that it could be some inflection point. But I don't think any of us know that. I don't see any compelling evidence in the near term to suggest that's where we're at.
If one wants to make the comment, go ahead, Josh.
I'm sorry, very quickly. Like, respectfully, could you imagine any of the three of us thinking we know better than Jensen Huang about whether or not there's an inflection point in AI capex? Like, think about the audacity of that idea. It's like, oh no, Jensen Huang is going to make this huge investment, and we're like, you probably shouldn't do that, dude. Here's my let me vomit up some AI knowledge that you might not be familiar with. It's almost like on its face is absurd. The thing that we have to guard against as investors is when everybody gets too bullish all at the same time. You could have a bear market within a bull market. Like, you could get killed in one of these stocks. And so what's the right answer? To Joe's earlier point, this is not a binary business. Sometimes the answer is just position size. It's like, all right, I agree that the AI revolution is A, B, C, D, all these superlatives, but like my own risk level is higher than it's ever been because the stock has 20x'd. So like, let me do something intelligent here with my own risk taking. It's not about let me try to predict the end of the AI capex cycle. What are you, insane?
Hey,
Go ahead,
Josh,
Jimmy.
let me, great points. But, to this overall comment of hinge point, are we at an inflection point? Are we in a bubble? Think about what a bubble looks like. It looks like price to earnings multiples rocketing higher. I am looking right now at a chart of Cisco's price to earnings multiple back in the 90s. And it went from roughly 28 times to 120 times and then came back down to 28 times. If you look at the Mag 7, and obviously not all of them, I'm not going to include Tesla in this as an example, but if you look at take NVIDIA as the poster child, 3 years ago it was around 50 times forward earnings, and now it's around 30 times forward earnings. That's not what happens in a bubble. You don't see the multiple contract like that. Now, somebody will say, and probably is saying to the TV screen right now, yeah, but what about the earnings estimates? Maybe they're going to come down. Maybe they're too high. Yeah, maybe they will at some point, but I got news for you. I don't think it's next quarter or the next few quarters. I just don't see that happening with the demand we're seeing from hyperscalers and others, and not even talking about the international expansion of data centers.
All right, a lot of bullishness here on the desk. Meanwhile, NVIDIA share is pulling back just about 2% right now. Coming up next on Halftime, Josh Brown's back with his best stocks in the market. He says this energy name has an A-plus chart. Find out who's at the head of the class coming up. More Halftime's back in just 2 minutes. And we are back on Halftime with Josh Brown's best stocks in the market. Josh, tossing it over to you.
All right. Guys, as you all well know, rooting for the energy sector, being overweight energy in the modern era. It's a little bit like being a Jets fan. every once in a while, like they'll win a big game and everyone will look at each other and be like, are the Jets for real? And then the next week, oh, wait, no, they're not. And that's been the story with the sector. I don't like the sector right now, but there are some really interesting moves happening within the sector. And yesterday we wrote some of them up. So I want to roll through these with you guys very quickly. These are the 5 best stocks in the energy sector. Valero is number 1. I call this an A-plus chart. Let's go ahead and put up a 1 year. This thing is already broken out. So for people who like to anticipate breakouts, this is not the chart for you. For those that are comfortable buying breakouts and are willing to allow for a low volume pullback here in the stock to get long, I would keep it on your screen. This one, the risk management is obvious. I'd use 136 as a pivot point. You can see that is the 200-day. We had a golden cross here in the chart a couple of weeks back. If it breaks below 136, 140, something's changed. We don't want to be long. Marathon is also an A, not quite an A+, but getting there. There are no sellers here, as you can see. All the sellers have been cleared out. The 200-day moving average is flat. It'll be turning up very soon, like a smile. That's your off-ramp. I'd use the 200-day as my risk management. I have Baker Hughes as a B+, BKR. We've talked about this stock before. It was on the best stocks list prior to Liberation Day. Look at that sell-off in April. It scratched and clawed all the way back. This is the best of the oil field service names. This thing's breaking out. RSI in the 60s, not yet overbought. The August lows at $42 is your stop. So that's your risk reward here. I know it's higher than where it was when I wrote it up yesterday. I wasn't on the show yesterday. My apologies. 2 more very quickly, Frank. Phillips 66, also a refiner, PSX. This is a C, but it could become a B. So I don't want people to get discouraged. It's on the best stocks list, not because of any defined uptrend here. It just happens to be hanging high, and it's been hanging in there for so long that by default it's become one of the better names in the group. Keep it on your screen. I don't love this one. And then there's Chevron. CVX I personally own. I bought it terribly. Right before that huge sell-off this spring, I got long that false breakout. Was totally wrong and had no discipline. I wrote it down and I averaged down. It ended up being the right thing, but that is not what we do with best stocks typically. That said, big dividend, huge buyback. This is not quite a B yet. It's also a C, but it's a chart that could set up. This is the one that I'm hoping, because I'm long, becomes the next big breakout. But as you can see, you got a lot of resistance in the high 160s. If you're conservative, I would almost let that fight happen before pulling the trigger on a long. I don't quite trust it yet from these levels. So those are your best oil energy stocks in the market right now.
Yeah, energy also the best performing sector today. So, Joe, for the audience that can't see, you had your glasses on for Valero. We gave it an A. You got the Baker Hughes with the B. You took the glasses off. So why don't we start there?
Listen, I don't know if this is the process nowadays, but when I was in school, you had parent-teacher night, and you had to go to school with your parent, and the teacher would sit there and review all your subjects in front of you. And I feel like Josh did that with all of my energy positions right now. Baker Hughes is something that we've had in the Joe T since January. It has clearly been one of the leading oil field services companies, and they've managed the business. Josh is right. They've managed the business incredibly well in what has been a difficult environment for energy. The refiners really have stood out over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And I think the foundation of their outperformance is built upon a low, stable energy price. Oil in the low 60s is good for these 3 names. The problem that I had personally is I basically got over-levered in my position. I bought all 3. I bought Phillips, I bought Marathon, I bought Valero. What I decided to do is sell out of Marathon, which looks like a bad idea right now. And the reason I did that was Josh is right. Valero's broken out, Marathon is broken out, Phillips is yet to break out. And Phillips has the potential to do so. They have some activism there as well with Elliott Management. So I think the refiner, trader, and energy is right now probably where you have the strongest momentum in terms of price and in terms of earnings growth.
All right, Josh Brown's best stocks in the market. Also, looking ahead, you can catch Josh and myself at our next CNBC Pro live event right here at the New York Stock Exchange. It's coming up on January the 15th. We're going to have a series of interactive clinics to help you invest, chart, and trade just like a pro. The tickets are on sale now. We got a few tickets left. They're pretty limited. You can scan the QR code on the screen and visit cnbcevents.com/pro-live for more info. Josh, I was here last time. We had such an enthusiastic group of people. We got the UN in town right now. I'm telling you, the last time we had this group in here at the New York Stock Exchange, we had people from out of the country on the West Coast, the Southwest, people from Hawaii, from all over the place. From what I'm hearing this time, we have people from Europe, Asia coming in this time. It's going to be exciting.
Very cool.
Giving me nothing. Josh Brown, thank you very much for that. We're still awaiting comments from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. We're going to take you there live as soon as that begins. Halftime's going to be back right after this.
Minimums.
Welcome back to Halftime. I'm Silvana Hanal with your CNBC News Update. U.S. Secret Service agents say they dismantled a network of electronic devices around New York City that could be used to disable the city's cell phone network. Authorities are investigating whether the people who created the network plan to use it to disrupt the United Nations General Assembly, which is underway in New York now. They say the system was used to anonymously convey assassination threats against senior U.S. officials and for other criminal activity. NATO warned Russia today it will use all necessary military and non-military tools to defend itself from airspace breaches. It comes after Estonia reported an intrusion of fighter jets last week and after NATO shot down drones in Polish airspace earlier this month. And attorneys for Sean Diddy Combs are requesting he serve no more than 14 months in prison for his conviction on 2 prostitution-related charges. That would mean he would go free almost immediately if the judge agreed, because it would include his 13 months already served. Each of his charges carries a maximum of 10 years in prison, Frank. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Silvana now back at CNBC HQ. Silvana, thank you very much. We now want to get to Eamon Jabbers in Washington with breaking headlines from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Eamon.
Frank, that's right. The Fed chair is set to speak now in Rhode Island in a short time. And what he's going to say is that downside risks to employment have shifted the balance of risks. He's also going to talk about near-term risks to inflation now, which are tilted to the upside, and risks to the employment are now tilted, he says, to the downside. He says that last week's cut, quote, leaves us well positioned to respond to economic developments, and that there's no risk-free path here going forward. Current policy stance, he says, is modestly restrictive, and the overall effect of policy changes remains to be seen. The public trust in economic and political institutions, he says, has been challenged since the COVID era and the great financial crisis, and as a result, he says, public servants, quote, need to focus tightly on carrying out critical missions in the midst of stormy seas. That seems to be an allusion, at least, to the political pressure that the Fed is under. On the labor market, Powell says unemployment rate is low, but it has edged up, and that there's market slowing in both supply and demand for workers. The pace of job creation appears to be running below break-even rate. And on inflation, he says inflation remains somewhat elevated, and the data suggests price increases reflect higher tariffs, not broader price pressures, Frank. So we'll wait for those remarks from the Fed chair here in just a couple of minutes in Rhode Island.
Yeah, we're certainly waiting for our Fed Chair Jerome Powell to speak any minute in Rhode Island. Eamon Jabbers live in D.C. Thank you very much for those headlines. Joe, I want to come over to you first and foremost. The unemployment issue here, or the topic, I should say, very interesting. In January of this year, unemployment was at 4%. Last read sitting at about 4.3%. And Jerome Powell highlighting that still relatively historically low, but certainly an increase.
Well, yes, I think it's at its highest level since the July of 2024 employment report. Jeffrey Gundlach highlighted with Scott Wapner last week something that I think is really important when you're thinking about these labor statistics. The unemployment rate is what you should be focusing on.
Not job creation.
No. I think there's going to be a tremendous distortion because of what's going on right now with immigration. So you can't look at these figures and expect you're going to get gains of 150, 175,000. You might see 10, 15,000. You have to look at the unemployment rate. And just as we had that uptick in July of 24, the response at that time was to do what? You got a 50 basis point rate cut in September. You got a similar uptick this time around. The Fed is responding to that, rightfully so, with a quarter point rate cut. Let's see where that rate goes, because last time, what happened with the rate? Obviously, we saw an improvement, a welcomed improvement in the unemployment rate. That 4.3 was your highest level.
Very important to keep in mind. We have the JOLTS report coming up next week, and also, of course, the monthly jobs report coming up next week. So two very important data points. Jim, just your reaction to Fed Chair Jerome Powell saying that the labor market looks like it's moving below break even, obviously signaling that he sees some weakening, maybe significant weakening.
Yeah, well, and I think the question here is whether the Fed is going to be proactive or not. And let's face it, generally speaking, history says they are not proactive. They wait too late to make moves. There are many things you can look into in the labor market and say the labor market's just fine, initial weekly jobless claims. On the other hand, the direction, Joe, to your point about the direction of the unemployment rate is clearly higher, and continuing claims are high. It shows clearly that companies, while they're not firing, are not hiring either. So will the Fed be prophylactic in taking one or two more rate cuts this year? It's probably the right move, but I think it's an open question. I don't think it's decided yet. I think that's what Chairman Powell is going to say. He's going to wait on the data. It is unlike the Fed to do things in advance of bad news. Hopefully they'll get it right this time.
Josh, coming over to you. The Fed chair is saying that tariff-related price increases look like they're going to be spread over several quarters. The estimate for core PCE coming up just this week, 2.9%. Now, a month ago, the Fed chair seemed to think that was okay. Do you think that's still okay for Fed? Well, Josh, I'm sorry to cut you off. We actually want to go to Fed Chair Jerome Powell speaking live in Rhode Island right now.
Thank you for your warm reception, and thank you, Senator Reid, for your very kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be back in Rhode Island. The last time I had the opportunity to speak to the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, as Lori mentioned, was in the fall of 2019, actually November 25th, 2019. And I said then, quoting, "If the outlook changes materially, policy will change as well." Well, little did any of us know, just a couple of months later, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived, Both the economy and our policy evolved dramatically in ways that no one could have predicted. Along with actions by Congress, the administration, and the private sector, the Fed's aggressive response helped stave off historically severe downside risks to the economy. The COVID pandemic came on the heels of the painfully slow, decade-long recovery from the global financial crisis. And these two back-to-back world historical crises have left behind scars that will be with us for a long time. In democracies around the world, public trust in economic and political institutions has been challenged. Those of us who are in public service at this time need to focus tightly on carrying out our critical missions to the best of our ability in the midst of stormy seas and powerful crosswinds. Throughout this turbulent period, central banks like the Fed have had to develop innovative new policies that were designed to deliver on our statutory goals during times of crisis, rather than for everyday use. Despite these two unique, extremely large shocks, the U.S. economy has performed as well or better than other large advanced economies around the world. And as always, it's essential that we continue to look back and learn the right lessons from these difficult years, and that process has been ongoing now for more than a decade. So, turning to the present day, the U.S. economy is showing resilience in the midst of substantial changes in trade and immigration policies, as well as in fiscal, regulatory, and geopolitical arenas. These policies are still emerging, and their longer-term implications will take some time to be seen. Recent data show that the pace of economic growth has moderated. The unemployment rate is low but has edged up. Job gains have slowed, and the downside risks to employment have risen. At the same time, inflation has risen recently and remains somewhat elevated. In recent months, it has become clear that the balance of risks has shifted, prompting us to move our policy stance closer to neutral at our FOMC meeting last week. GDP rose at a pace of about 1.5% in the first half of this year, down from 2.5% last year. The moderation in growth largely reflects a slowdown in consumer spending. Activity in the housing sector remains weak, but business investment in equipment and intangibles has picked up from last year's pace, largely reflecting the AI build-out. As noted in the September Beige Book, which I bet you wonder what it is, the September Beige Book, that's a report that gathers qualitative information from across the Federal Reserve System. We'll talk about later. Businesses continue to say that uncertainty is weighing on their outlook. Measures of consumer and business sentiment declined sharply in the spring. They have since moved up, but remain low relative to the start of the year. In the labor market, there has been a marked slowdown in both the supply of and the demand for workers, an unusual and challenging development. In this less dynamic and somewhat softer labor market, the downside risks to employment have risen. The unemployment rate edged up to 4.3% in August, but has remained relatively stable at a low level over the past year. Payroll job gains slowed sharply over summer months as employers added an average of just 29,000 per month over the past 3 months. The recent pace of job creation appears to be running below what we call the break-even rate, that is the rate needed to hold the unemployment rate constant. But a number of other labor market indicators remain broadly stable. For example, the ratio of job openings to unemployment remains near 1, and multiple measures of job openings have been moving roughly sideways, not down, as have initial claims for unemployment insurance. Inflation, meanwhile, has eased significantly from its highs of 2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. The latest available data indicate that total PCE prices rose, that's personal consumption expenditure prices, that's the inflation measure that we follow most closely, rose 2.7% over the 12 months ending in August, up from 2.3% in August 2024. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.9% last month, also higher than a year ago. Goods prices, after falling last year, are driving the pickup inflation. Incoming data and surveys suggest that those price increases largely reflect higher tariffs rather than broader price pressures. Disinflation for services continues, including for housing services. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up on balance over the course of this year on news about tariffs. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term inflation expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. The overall economic effects of the significant changes in trade, immigration, fiscal, and regulatory policy remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the tariff-related effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived, a one-time shift in the price level. Now, a one-time increase does not mean all at once. Tariff increases will likely take some time to work their way through supply chains. As a result, this one-time increase in the price level will likely be spread over several quarters and show up as somewhat higher inflation during that period. But uncertainty around the path of inflation remains high. We will carefully assess and manage the risk of higher and more persistent inflation. We'll make sure that this one-time increase in prices does not become an ongoing inflation problem. Turning to monetary policy, near-term risks to inflation are tilted to the upside, and risks to employment are tilted to the downside, a challenging situation. Two-sided risks mean that there is no risk-free path. If we ease too aggressively, we could leave the inflation job unfinished and need to reverse course later to fully restore 2% inflation. If we maintain restrictive policy too long, the labor market could soften unnecessarily. When our goals are in tension like this, our framework has long called for us to balance both sides of our dual mandate. The increased downside risks to employment have shifted the balance of risks to achieving our goals. We therefore judged it appropriate at our last meeting to take another step toward a more neutral policy stance, lowering the target range for the federal funds rate by 25 basis points to 4 to 4.25%. This policy stance, which I personally see as still modestly restrictive, leaves us well positioned to respond to potential economic developments. Our policy is not on a preset course. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment and bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans, and we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. So thank you again for having me here, and I very much look forward to our discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon once again, Mr. Chair. Thank you for those opening remarks and reminding us just how tremendously the world has changed and evolved since you were last here in 2019. President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, Susan Collins, is also here with us today. And President Collins, we have had the opportunity many times to discuss with you the conditions in this Fed region, of which Rhode Island is part of the Boston region. So, Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to think about your comments reflecting on the importance, what you have said, the importance of deeply understanding local labor markets. And I'm wondering if in your deliberations leading up to the most recent FOMC meeting, whether there was anything particularly distinctive in what you saw coming out of the Boston Beige Book.
So let me say a word about the Beige Book. So there are 12 reserve banks, as you know, around the country, and each of them has deep ties into not just the business community, but medical community, educational community, nonprofits. And each FOMC cycle, which is sort of 8 of those a year, they do a deep dive and they collect lots and lots of information about the economy. And so, and that information gets collated and put into what we call the Beige Book because it's beige, and we're not that original. And
So we get that a couple weeks before each FOMC meeting. And I have to say, I don't know of any source of sort of qualitative information about the economy that even approaches this. It's just a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and I personally find it very useful. Sometimes you look at that book and you see significant regional differences, and this is not one of those times. So, for example, the Boston Fed piece in the last beige book talked about lots of spending on AI. Well, guess what? That was pretty common across 8 or 9 of the districts. So I would say nothing really jumped out from the Boston piece. What you saw was all around the country, you saw pretty modest growth, wage and price inflation at modest to moderate levels, the economy growing but not fast, and uncertainty, significant uncertainty about federal public policy is kind of weighing on investments and decisions about investment and hiring, except in the area of the AI build-out, which is just going really strong pretty much many parts of the country.
So nothing distinctive from the Boston region that would inform your future decision-making, looking at the setting of monetary policy?
What I saw from Boston was quite similar and overlapping with a number of other districts. Again, sometimes that's the case where things are pretty much of a piece. Sometimes different regions, particularly if there's a commodity price thing, you would see maybe things in the commodity-oriented regions doing differently from other regions of the country. Right now, it's much more the same around the country, I would say.
So let's talk about and build on what you described a few moments ago about the dual mandate of the Fed. And if you could talk about these conditions that wax and wane over time, what signals will you be looking for in the run-up to the next FOMC meeting, which is in roughly 30 days?
We have 2 goals, as you mentioned, maximum employment and price stability, and they're equal goals under the law. So almost all the time, they work together. They complement one another. So, for example, when the economy is weak, the unemployment rate might be high and the inflation rate would be low, and that it calls for stimulus from us. And when the economy is really strong and the labor market is tight, that's when inflation will be moving up, and so policy might be a little bit tighter. That's almost always the case. Right now is the quite unusual case where risks to, as I mentioned in my remarks, risks to employment are to the downside and to inflation to the upside. Now, we only have one tool, which is monetary policy, really interest rates, and really it's calling for different answers. So for a long time, we have a document called the Statement on Longer Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategy. We call it the consensus statement to save time. That says, for a long time, it said that when the 2 goals are in tension, we'll look at how far each one is from its goal and the time that it's expected to take to get back to that goal. And so we balance the 2 goals. So what we've done all year this year is we've had our policy rate has been tight because inflation has been above our target, but the labor market was very solid. Now, over the last really 4 months, really over the summer, the labor market has softened. Payroll jobs have dropped a lot, so we can't really say that anymore. And I think what that told us is that stance of really having a tight focus on inflation really needs to moderate toward a more balanced approach. And so that's why we took the action we took at our last meeting. And as we go to our next meeting, to your question, we'll be asking ourselves, we'll be looking at the data very carefully, labor market data, growth data, inflation data, all of the vast quantities of data that we get, and asking ourselves, is our policy in the right place? And if not, we move it there.
Some may wonder about the frothiness of the markets reaching record heights and also record valuations. How does the Fed think about that in the equation?
Financial markets? So we monitor financial markets very carefully. Our policy works through financial conditions. So that's credit spreads and interest rate levels and equity prices in the aggregate that can affect spending, for example. We look at all of that, but really our focus is on our 2 goals, and that is maximum employment and price stability. And when we see one of them weakening, we're going to respond appropriately with our tools. And in this case, that meant reducing the federal funds rate by 25 basis points. And, we'll see what the future brings, but that's what we do. We look carefully at financial conditions, more from a perspective, though, of financial stability. So we see that the banks are well capitalized. Actually, in the aggregate, households are in good shape financially. I know people at the bottom end of the income spectrum are under pressure. No question about that. But it's not a time of elevated financial stability risks.
So the federal funds rate really governs consumer credit, but not so as it pertains to mortgage rates, correct?
That's right.
And let's talk about how the average consumer is going to see any difference in the intervening months relative to an easing of interest rates and the ability and maybe even more confidence to spend.
So we don't set mortgage rates, but when we change the federal funds rate, it will affect the mortgage rates and also all other consumer borrowing rates. Really, all interest rates that are on a floating basis will move a little bit or even a lot if they're short term based on our moves. So the people will feel that over time. Also, it's not just these days. The market is pricing in the next 6 months what's going to happen to rates. So this is something that wasn't really the case 50 years ago. Now markets listen to us and follow, and they make an estimation of where they think rates are going, and so they'll price things in. And so longer term rates will move because of what the market participants expect us to do. So you'll begin to see, and you're already seeing, changes in rates long before we make the decision. It can often be already, priced in.
Is it fair to say that the Fed and the markets really have a higher tolerance for risk today, more so than perhaps before the pandemic?
I think if you look at some prices, then they're elevated relative to historical levels. There were times before the pandemic when it happens periodically. Equity prices will move up and down, and we do monitor that. But we're not targeting any level of prices for particular financial assets. We don't have a view that we know what the right price of any particular financial asset is. We do look at overall financial conditions. And we ask ourselves whether our policies are affecting financial conditions in a way that is what we're trying to achieve. But you're right. It by many measures, for example, equity prices are fairly highly valued.
Let's segue to the topic of AI and largely AI stocks and periphery stocks really driving the markets in many ways. Let's talk a little bit about the great unknown of AI. And if we think about various ages, our industrial ages, whether it be steam to electricity to the information age and now to the age of AI, would you consider this to be the most disruptive force ever in modern American history?
I think it's way too early to say that. I wouldn't go that far. I would say clearly generative AI has all the earmarks of an emerging technology that could be very important in our economy and in our society. But it's very early to be making that kind of bold statement. So, what we're seeing is companies and institutions like the Fed, for that matter, are starting to experiment with how this new set of tools can be used in our operations. Mm-hmm. And it's very early days on that. And, I think we have to wait and see. That's a good thing. I know many of the large financial institutions and other central banks, and we are asking ourselves, how can this help us do our jobs better? Mm. And I think it's going to be a period of experimentation over a period of years. And, the history is always that there's a lot of fear that technological innovation will eliminate jobs. What has tended to happen in history over time is that it just raises productivity and creates new jobs to replace the old jobs. And that happens. And sometimes it can take a long time, but ultimately that has been the pattern for the last couple of 100 years. Is this time going to be different? I just don't think we know yet. I don't think anybody knows.
Mm-hmm. You are a labor market futurist, also a historian. And the concept of AI and humans in the loop, very profound impact on the labor force. What are your thoughts about specifically agentic AI as a differentiator from generative AI? And how will the Fed be looking at the impacts of the workforce, the labor participation rate, given the unknown of what could happen with displacement around AI tools at all ends of the spectrum?
You know, our tools work on demand, basically. Lower interest rates, higher interest rates, they work on demand. When there are structural changes in the economy, there's not a lot that an interest rate change can do for that. And so if you're talking about distributional issues or labor force participation or retraining or any of the things that come to mind in connection with those questions, that's really going to be something for legislators and the private sector. We of course, we have many labor economists, and a good portion of them are studying what the potential effects of AI on the labor force, and many great economists around the country and around the world are publishing on that now. And you know, it really is too early to say. I think you can say that some jobs are going to be phased out, some jobs are going to evolve, and people are going to be further trained and that sort of thing, and be able to keep a job like that. And there'll be new jobs that come. And how will that balance work out, and what will be the timing of it? I think it's just quite hard to say.
But how does that factor into the deliberations on a near-term basis? Things are moving so quickly, and the observation and the argument that artificial intelligence isn't just impacting those entry-level jobs and those, quasi-unskilled jobs, but really tentacles reaching into highly skilled professions, whether it be finance, whether it be communications and media, whether it be healthcare, whether it be law, finance. So all ends of the spectrum, highly educated individuals down to more easily automated tasks. Sort of a really interesting problem for those of you that are studying labor market economics. How do you approach that?
Well, a lot of what we're doing with our time is trying to understand the current position of the economy, what's actually going on in the economy today. Pardon me. So part of that is hiring rate has really dropped. Job creation has dropped very sharply. So what are the factors there? So I mentioned earlier, I think, part of it just is there's a lot of uncertainty about the direction of public policy, and so companies are holding off. They're not hiring, and when you don't hire through attrition, your labor force shrinks, and you save money that way. That may be a way of passing on tariff costs. It may be something like that. So that's happening. Lots of questions around whether AI is a major factor associated with the relatively low hiring rate for people just graduating from school and just entering the labor market. And, people are doing studies on that, and I looked at one from Stanford, another from the New York Fed in the last week, and the sense of it was, we think we can find some evidence that generative AI is having it's one of the reasons here, but we can't really say it's the main reason. And, we have our Jackson Hole conference every year in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we had some great labor economists, and one of the big debates was what's going on with AI, and there was a professor from, I want to say, Columbia, who just basically said, there's no evidence that this is acting any differently than her view was, not acting any differently from other technological, movements, waves. And so I think she would be more at the end of an optimist, a techno-optimist. Mm-hmm. We've all, there are books out there that will tell you the world is ending. And, but I don't think we know. Again, I think we're going to see how this evolves. And again, if it does turn out to be something where labor force participation really declines in a way that creates, social difficulties, that's going to be something that legislators and the private sector will have to address. We just don't know that yet, though.
Over the weekend, I read where you had been discussing, just picking up on what you said about Gen Z and college graduates and any possible disruptions in trying to find jobs. So Gen Z would be those born between 1997 and 2012, roughly ages 13 to 28. What are your thoughts on college enrollment? We'll talk a little bit about labor disruption in just a minute, and Jackson Hole, because I know that's a favorite of yours. But a lot of the individuals in this room today may have family members that fall squarely in that 13 to 28 category. What would you say about that?
I mean, again, we all see the data that it's just gotten tough for people just entering the labor force to be hired. But remember, the overall national aggregate hiring rate is at very, very low level. The layoff rate is also at a very, very low level. You're in a low fire, low hire economy. And it feels like companies are just, they've kind of stopped hiring or slowed down their hiring because they want to see how this all shakes out. We're having very important changes to economic policy in the United States, and companies and people are wondering, how's that going to work out? So I think that's part of it. The other thing I would add, though, is, there's a lot of good scholarship around technological innovation and inequality, if you will. And the sense of it is really that if schools and society give students graduating the skills and aptitudes they need to benefit from evolving technology, you can have declining inequality over time. And that's what the United States had for many, many years, up until about 1970, when U.S. educational attainment kind of plateaued and inequality takes off. So it's really down to having the skills. So kids who come out of school today with technological skills and can work with this new technology, they're probably going to be fine. They're going to be great. If you don't have those skills, though, you're increasingly left with less attractive employment options. So in a way, it's an educational issue.
Our society is our education system, and you spoke about inequality, particularly the digital divide, and thinking about where the United States really has paced among countries throughout the world. Particularly, that was a subject that you initiated at Jackson Hole back in August. What are your thoughts on how that is likely to really change the way we look at technology as a force for productivity and advancement?
Technology has been raising incomes and productivity for really a couple hundred years since the Industrial Revolution. It's been an amazing thing for the quality of human life, and there's no reason why that has to change. In the United States was the first country to have gender-blind secondary education, and if you go back, you'll see that there's a great book on this, but just basically the U.S. had fast technological innovation for a century, and also declining inequality because people were coming out and their educational the capabilities they took out of the educational system gave them the ability to benefit from evolving technology. So, and that's really the key, because technology, what it does is it makes us more productive. One summer I worked on a project that was building houses, and I basically had a shovel and I just dug most of the summer. And now that would be a Bobcat, which can do 100 times the work, no blisters, no water breaks. It's just much more productive. And you see housing production's gotten, at least it did get for a while, much more productive, not so much lately. But that I think is the story. And while U.S. educational attainment, college graduation rates and things like that leveled out, they're still going up. The rest of the world caught on and has really caught up in terms of educational attainment. And that really is the key. To your point, your educational system, your country is your educational system ultimately. It's the people that come out and what can they do, and a variety of other factors too, obviously. But I think that's a key element. I'm struck by this because this was a major factor at our recent conference, and we had a great conversation about it.
Well, tell us about the book. You gave me a homework assignment the other day, so I did download it, but I think everyone should follow that lead.
All right. It's a book's called The Race Between Education and Technology. It's by Claudia Golden and Larry Katz, two Harvard economists, and it basically talks about the race between education and technology. So I'd recommend that to anybody. It was written in, I want to say, 2005, And they basically presented at Jackson Hole, they presented an update to the current day. The findings basically hold. It's very, I mean, I'm not a PhD economist. I read it 20 years ago.
But you said it still holds very much true today.
It does. And I think it's a good explanation for why the U.S. has had, rising inequality. This is their thesis, and I think it's they call it also skill bias technical change. So you need skills to benefit, but if you have those skills, then technology makes you more productive, and that's what we need. Incomes can only rise if productivity is increasing. We're sort of working as many hours as we can work now, so it really is down to how much output can you have in an hour, and that's productivity. So I would recommend that. I'm not getting any royalties for that, but by the way, Claudia Golden won the Nobel Prize for her work about 2 years ago. So I'm not the only one who thinks it was good work.
Chair Powell, let's move on to tariffs. This is an issue that confronts the business people here with us today. You addressed it very briefly in your opening remarks. You indicated that you believe that the costs of the tariff movement is in fact more transitory than embedded in supply chain. So I think we would appreciate hearing more about how the Fed thinks about evolving tariff policy.
So we're now collecting a good bit of revenue. The federal government collecting a good chunk of revenue, at a $300 billion a year pace. And the question is, who's paying that? And the candidates for paying those tariffs would be the exporter, the foreign exporter, or someone on our shores. It could be a company or a retailer or someone who's using the imported product to manufacture something, or the end consumer. And so so far, in its incredibly early days, it doesn't look like the overseas exporters are carrying the bulk of it. It looks like it's that middle group. It's retailers and it's importers, and they're not passing along to consumers that much of the cost. So the actual effects on inflation have been quite modest so far. It's really not. It's a small amount, but I mean, for example, I mentioned that core PCE inflation is 2.9%. Maybe 0.3 or 0.4 of that is tariffs. So it's not the big factor. It's not a big inflationary thing, but it is something that is driving up inflation a bit. And the question is, are companies are they going to eventually be able to pass that stuff through? And then that might drive inflation up a little higher. So we've been watching this since the beginning. Half our mandate is inflation, and I would say that the pass through to consumers has been later and less than we expected. How much of that will continue, I don't know. But the responsible thing from our standpoint was to watch and wait, because it's our job to make sure we don't make a mistake on inflation.
Well, that was my question. Do you imagine that is going to change, where the cost of tariffs will be more deeply embedded and passed on to the consumer? What do you foresee as?
So our forecast, and I think almost all the forecasts are for there to be a one-time pass-through, which will go through the end of this year, well into next year, and that by the end of next year, the one-time increase from the tariffs will be done, and you'll be back to the non-tariff related inflation, which should be much closer to our 2% goal. That's almost everyone's base case. It's actually our job to make sure that that's the outcome, though. So we can't be in a situation where we're just going to assume that. We can't leave that part of the goal unguarded. And so that's why we've been careful about cutting. We didn't want to cut too early. I mentioned in my remarks, we cut too early, we may find out in a year that inflation actually wasn't under control and it's back up to 3.5% or 4%. No one thinks this is the base case, but that's the risk of cutting too early or too much. Of course, the risk of cutting too late, as I mentioned, is that we unnecessarily, the labor market weakens unnecessarily. There's no risk-free path, and it's a very difficult policy environment when your two goals are telling you two different things. You've got to make a compromise, and we really, again, haven't been in that situation for many, many years. It does happen, but it's happened now, and we'll manage our way through it. But we sort of have to look at both of them as equal, We can't just say we're going to do this one and not that one, unless this one is clearly a greater risk. And now they're coming into closer balance, I would say. We do see meaningful weakness in the labor market now, very low job creation. The unemployment rate's still low, though, and the quits rate is low, and a lot of things suggest that the labor market has reached a kind of unusual stability of much lower demand and much lower supply for workers. It's a really unusual kind of a balance, if you want to call it that, but nonetheless, we think it's downside risk.
Well, if you could elaborate, what are some of the factors that are leading to depressed demand for labor?
So depressed demand for labor, based on surveys and talking to people who are doing hiring, a big chunk of it is that they're just unsure about what to do. Businesses, and I'd love to talk to people after this. Businesses don't want to do a lot of hiring. They may be postponing major capex, major initiatives, major acquisitions, and maybe they'll replace workers who retire, but they're not looking to grow. This isn't every company and every part of every company in the world. It's just an effect kind of at the margin. That's got to be part of it. I think that's the demand side. The supply side, of course, has a lot to do with immigration policy. So immigration was at a very high level for 2 or 3 years before this year, and now immigration has really gone close to zero, and immigration is not really contributing to the labor force growth now, whereas it's been most of what the labor force growth was, and now so at the same time you've got declining demand and also declining supply of workers, of new workers.
One of your passions is demystifying the Fed. You enjoy speaking about it, and those that are Fed watchers are wondering, will there in fact be 2 additional rate cuts before the end of the year? Of course, we're uncertain about that, if I understood your comments correctly. What does it mean to demystify the Fed, and what can each of us in this room do to be better Fed watchers for the benefit of our own businesses, if you will?
So not so many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, and for a long time before that, the main theory of central banking was to be mysterious and obscure. In fact, Montague Norman, who's a very famous former head of the Bank of England, but ending in the middle of World War II, famously said, never apologize, never explain. And he thought that monetary policy worked back, and everyone thought it works best when no one understands. It's kind of mysterious. So starting maybe 40 years ago, a bunch of economists, including Alan Blinder and a number of others, said, you know what, that's wrong, because if markets and the public understand the way you'll react to incoming data, they'll kind of do your job for you. And so they argued for greater transparency. And people said, you know what, that makes sense. So central banks started being transparent. The Fed didn't even issue a post-Federal Open Market Committee announcement until 1994, and then did so as an experiment just to see what would happen. Now, so if you fast forward through, the 30 years since then, now we have a post-meeting statement, we have minutes, we have press conferences, every FOMC participant
press release
on Squawk Box with a press release. So, and maybe some people say it's too much, it's excessive, but so that's the way it's evolved. So we try really hard to communicate with the interested public in a way that is useful and comprehensible and jargon-free. That's what we focus on, and that's all we're trying to do. So we don't use their, every profession has their jargon, and you kind of need it for internal conversations, but we try not to do that. So that's all we're trying to do. A couple of thoughts about what I wouldn't say I can't make anyone a better Fed watcher, I don't think, but things I would want to tell people about the Fed. One is just this, that we're making decisions, our decisions are made under elevated levels of uncertainty, even in normal times. The economy is fundamentally, no one has been able to predict the economy more than for the next few months. It's an unpredictable, it's this enormous entity, and it's just not that predictable. So we have to we take very much a risk management approach, and one of the risks we're managing is that we don't exactly understand what the current state of the economy is and where it's going to go. So we try to have policy that can cover the range of plausible outcomes, not just one outcome. So that's one thing. So we're never saying that we know the economy is going to do this or we know it's going to do that, because honestly, it just, famous statement is financial forecasters are a humble lot with much to be humble about. So that's one thing I would say. Another is that you should, I just have to say this, whenever we make decisions, we're never, ever thinking about political things. And so we're based in Washington, D.C., and many of people, in Congress, and they're often things are seen through a lens of, is it good for this party or bad for this party or this politician? We're just not looking at things that way. We're looking at what's the best thing for the people that we serve in the medium term. What's the best policy? And many people don't believe us because they think, come on, you're really political. But the truth is, mostly people who are calling us political, it's just a cheap shot. And also, we don't engage. We don't, our argument is doing our jobs. We don't get into back and forth with external people. We just do our jobs. We keep our head down and do our jobs. That's what we do. So those are two things I would offer about the Fed.
We have run out of time. We have come to the end of our program, and I'm wondering if there's anything additional that you'd like to share with the members here today, and again to help us be more prepared as we begin to look to 2026 and strategic plans for business and things on the horizon that would help to, of course, create more jobs and more prosperity.
So I'll say one more thing that struck me just now about the Fed, and that is, remember, we have a really important job: maximum employment, price stability. We regulate and supervise the banks. We operate parts of the payment system. But those things are really about cyclical demand management and financial stability. The policies that really matter for the U.S. economy in the long run, things like investment, particularly investment in people, that's not something we can do. I think we get a disproportionate amount of attention compared to the things that really matter for the country, which are the things that Congress can do and the private sector can do, which are the things that will really matter for future generations, are not interest rate policy and the things that we do as important as we are. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, I'll just say this has been great, as always. I've enjoyed talking to so many people here today, and I love to get out and talk to people who are working in the real world, in the economy. There's nothing better than that. Most of my career was in the financial sector, and I constantly was out talking to people rather than sitting in my office looking at aggregate data on the economy. So this is a much more comfortable place to be. So,
you're headed back to D.C. later this afternoon.
Yes.
What does the rest of your day look like?
Get home. I won't get home until after dinner, so it looks like me working on the plane on the way back. So anyway, thank you so much.
Right.
It's been great. Thank you.
That was Fed Chair Powell making his first speech since last week's rate cut in terms of market reaction. Not much there to report. We're seeing the indices just fractionally on either side of the flat line here. Let's bring in Eamon Javers for some more reaction. And Eamon, he did underscore the notion that he talked about last week in terms of there not being a risk-free path, and also the Fed's stance on tariffs being sort of an isolated event.
Yeah, that's right, Melissa. He called it a challenging task for the Fed to deal with both inflation and unemployment, which are both going in the wrong direction potentially right now simultaneously. And so how do you deal with that as the Federal Reserve Chair? But some of the policy analysts who watch the Fed very closely are already out with notes saying that there's not much here that's new that we didn't hear in the press conference last week. Melissa, I was struck by a couple of things in the Q&A portion of this conference. One is this extensive conversation about AI. So much of the market now focused on these massive investments that we're seeing in AI. And Powell here sort of revealing his thoughts about AI and saying that he's not willing to say that it's going to be a totally world-transforming revolutionary technology. He said it's very early days at this point. He did sort of align himself a little bit with the techno-optimists who are saying, look, as AI destroys jobs, of course, it's going to create new categories of jobs that we can't even imagine right now. So that's something to to watch for. But he sort of ended up as an agnostic on AI and its impact on the labor market, saying, I don't think we know yet. We're going to have to see how this evolves. He did say that the job creation has dropped really sharply. He said he thinks that's in part due to policy uncertainty, perhaps around tariffs, but also this effect that we're seeing among young people coming out of school that may be impacted by AI. He said he called this, Melissa, a low fire, low hire economy, which I thought was interesting.
Yep. Eamon, thanks. Eamon Javers in Washington. As we mentioned, stocks are slightly lower right now. Just fractionally, the Dow and S&P did hit fresh record highs to start the session. That would be the fourth consecutive record for the S&P 500. Right now, the Dow is basically flat. S&P 500 down by 0.33%. Shares are up. Here we go. Second biggest gainer in the Dow is what, Mike? Boeing, yes. On reports that China and the U.S. are in the final stages of a deal for a big jet order.
Yeah, it's one of those days. Reverse of yesterday, you have a few of the big tech stocks weighing on the indexes, but the majority of stocks are up today. Meanwhile, gold hitting yet another all-time high, on track for its biggest annual rise since 1979. And a quick check on yields after Jay Powell just spoke. The 30-year at 475. You see right there, the 10 just under 413. 2-year yield at 360. Excuse me, just about. An auction of 2-year notes just wrapping up. Rick Santelli tracking the action at the CME. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Mike. Indeed, first of three auctions that are going to be cumulatively 183 billion of coupon supply. Today's 69 billion 2-year was slightly below average. The yield was 3.571. I gave the auction a C- for demand. The reasons? Well, the bid to cover was the weakest since the fall of last year. All the metrics were below 10 auction averages. The dealers took a little bit more than they normally do. So there wasn't one category that was horrible. All of it was a little bit below average. But there's something very important about this. Auctions for the last 4 or 5 weeks have been really solid auctions. Very high demand. Most of the grades I've been given have been A's and B's. This one's different. What's changed? What's changed is the Fed eased a quarter point. There's much debate. You just heard the Fed chairman. There's debate. Do we have stagflation? Is inflation going to run hot? Are we ever going to get to our 2% goal? All these things, I think, are going to take a little bit of bite out of demand in the auctions. Tomorrow will be 70 billion 5 years, followed by the final auction of 7 years, and we will continue to monitor investor demand domestically and globally. Melissa, Mike, back to you.
All right, Rick, thank you very much. Well, Jimmy Kimmel returning to ABC tonight, and one analyst says it's a good time for Disney to shut down the network. Needham's Laura Martin says Disney should consider simulcasting ABC's broadcast content on less regulated platforms like Hulu instead. She says that would help generate faster revenue growth for Disney and unlock more shareholder value. She has a buy rating on the stock and a $125 price target, and she joins us now. Welcome, Laura. It's good to have you. Make your case here. Not every day a company, kind of shuts down a business that still is producing cash flow, has a big audience. So why do it now?
So basically what we did is a bunch of math that showed that the write-off to the Walt Disney Company, if it just shut down ABC, the broadcaster, is about 5% of its market cap, which we think, because it would be accounted for as a discontinued operation, Wall Street would add back. But then because the ABC broadcast network is structurally shrinking every year, between 5 and 11% of its revenue is disappearing every year, it's slowing the reported growth rate of Disney. So Disney would grow its revenue 5% this year if it didn't own ABC, and about 4.5% because it does own ABC. So once you have higher growth rates of revenue, you get multiple expansion from Wall Street. So when we do the calculation of how much value they lose one time by shutting down the ABC network compared to the higher multiple they would get if they grew their revenue faster structurally over the next 10 years, we think there's about $20 billion of value creation, which is about 10% of the market cap of the company. And therefore, we're arguing that nothing else in the Disney empire is regulatable. So if you actually just shut down ABC, basically the government couldn't stop you from doing things. And that's increasingly valuable in a generative AI world. You don't want to be stopped to react to the marketplace and to consumers for any reason as generative AI continues to disrupt markets.
So a move that is this admittedly extreme, right? I mean, this is a network that's existed for many decades. It's based on the premise that if you kept it, you're going to remain under heavy regulatory pressure on a constant basis, right? Because that's the only reason you wouldn't sell it. I mean, why not get some value for it?
Right. So the only thing there is you have to go to the FCC, because we saw with Paramount, which was a little deal, like a $10 billion deal. It took them 14 months and they had to pay Donald Trump $15 million to get it done. So there's like, it's a big kerfuffle the minute you have to ask the FCC for anything. That's why, of course, if you'd rather sell it. But with this administration in office, you don't know what it's going to cost you to sell it and who you're going to have to pay to get FCC approval for anything.
So this thesis, Laura, what sort of value does this impute on other holders of networks, of linear TV? What does that mean for them in terms of valuation?
Right. So, I mean, I think the interesting case, I don't cover Comcast, but Comcast is separating its network from its unregulated businesses. You know, my thesis here is that you should move all content, you should simulcast at the very least all your broadcast content, which is regulatorily overseen, onto your unregulated platforms, which is your streaming, your cable networks. So it's actually bad for Comcast to separate those entities because now they can't move programming around. So that's one implication for Comcast. The other network, of course, is CBS. And I think now, as you guys know, like Oracle is a very close friend of Donald Trump. So I don't really, now that they've paid the $15 million to get the deal done, I don't think they'll have problems with Donald Trump. But, you know, I would say it's true of all networks. I think the FCC is creating volatility in these stocks, and just these networks aren't worth as much as the FCC would like to make shareholders believe.
At the same time, Laura, if Disney actually chose to shut down ABC, aren't they playing the short game? I mean, they're managing to the Trump administration's FCC, and with a change in administration, there could be a change in the tone at the FCC as well.
I think great point. Maybe. I just wanted to raise the point that the economics are positive if they shut it down and didn't sell it. So, because I haven't seen that before. And so I think it'd be actually value creative for Disney shareholders if they shut it down. I admit it's a radical thesis.
Laura, as we're speaking, news just crossed that Disney's raising the subscription price for Disney Plus, $2 or $3 per subscriber based on the package. I guess we don't really know what impact there may have been from the controversy surrounding the suspension of Kimmel's show on churn in Disney Plus. So what are your expectations there? And I guess, did it impair Disney Plus at all?
You know, I think all these streamers have to raise price because they've gone from 2 revenue streams over in the cable bundle. They need to raise their subscription price. And what Netflix has done as a model is smart, which is their ad-driven tier is being priced at like $8, and their normal subscription tier is $21. That gives Disney a lot of room to move to the upside. So I think that we're going to see this raising the non-ad tier price. So basically targeting like the wealthiest American consumers. You're going to really have to pay a lot not to have ads. So I think we're going to see this generally price increases by the streamers to try to get back to that economics that they're losing from the deteriorating linear TV bundle.
Yeah, and then of course they hope that if people stay at the ad tier, that develops enough that it becomes profitable or more profitable on its own merits. Laura Martin, appreciate the time today from Needham.
Shares of NVIDIA falling one day after the company announced a $100 billion investment in OpenAI to build data centers using NVIDIA's chips. Our next guest says NVIDIA's cash infusion into one of the biggest customers, its biggest customers, is a worrying sign. Joining us now, Tom Hancock, portfolio manager of the GMO U.S. Quality ETF. Tom, great to have you with us.
Hi, great to have me.
Why is this so concerning? I mean, isn't this a form of vendor financing, if you will, and that's existed for ages? Why could this signal a top or a bubble?
Yeah, well, I think vendor financing has a pretty spotty history, frankly. It's been a feature of past bubbles that we've seen. So NVIDIA is basically giving $100 million here. $35 million will go back, it's called rough numbers, into NVIDIA's revenue down the road. It'll look like revenue for NVIDIA, but it's not real cash they're getting. They're losing on the deal. And NVIDIA is also guaranteed, underwritten some of CoreWeave's investment too. So this is not to say it's a bubble or there's anything fraudulent here, but it's the kind of behavior that just demonstrates how much capital intensity there is in building out this AI infrastructure at a time where the monetization outside, some of the in-house applications of, say, a Meta or an Alphabet, and an environment where the monetization is very unclear at the scale companies have to invest in it.
I mean, yesterday, Mike and I were noting this sort of circularity of this whole NVIDIA OpenAI partnership, Tom. But does this make you rethink some of the holdings that you have in AI? Broadcom, for one, is TSMC, for instance. I mean, do you think now is the time to start paring back exposure, or is this something that you're just remarking on? Because investors could have been making the same sort of commentary for a while now, and they would have missed out on some pretty big stock runs.
Yeah. So I would say specifically on those names, Broadcom is more diversified and a safer play. It's, of course, more diversified in that AI is not its only business. It does a lot of other things in software as well as semiconductors. But within their AI business, it's much more targeted with their custom chips to the Alphabets and the Metas. They're talking about to these more proven use cases around, say, ad targeting or content delivery. We also think ASICs, their custom silicon, is going to gain share over GPUs, the more generic chips over time. So relatively well positioned. Probably our only hesitation around them, why we don't hold more, is just the valuation. Because the good news is they're diversified away from AI. The bad news is that they're diversified away from AI too. And despite my concerns about the capital investment now, if you have a really long horizon, we do believe in AI. It is a great productivity enhancement. If you sort of go down the chain from, who do Broadcom and NVIDIA use to build their chips? Of course, it's TSMC. How does TSMC build their chips? They buy equipment from Lam and ASML and KLA and so forth. So that's kind of where we feel like however the trade goes, those companies will win. They have, the strong balance sheets to survive. They have business in smartphone or memory or in other areas that are actually kind of cyclically at a trough. So it's not like everything's perfect right now and there's some room for improvement. So that's, where we like to play AI right now. And a lot of that does boil down to thinking through which are the more proven use cases and which are the ones that, like that MIT study that came out last month where most projects haven't been successes. I think that will continue to be true. And it's going to be hard to figure out which projects will be the successes. So we'd rather not get too speculative around that.
Sure. Tom, you pursue a quality strategy, and those have worked. A lot of the market gains have been those companies that have the strong balance sheets and the strong earnings growth and all the things you would look for. Do you have a concern that characteristic, that factor in the market is becoming a little bit too levered just to the AI trade? You're kind of, chasing the same profit growth streams, or are there other places that you also are playing?
That is a concern. If you screen sort of broadly on quality, as we and others do, you get a basket of stocks that's increasingly a tech sector basket. And that's, with good reason, these are great companies. But I think as a portfolio manager, as an investor, you want to be more diversified than that. So the good news is that's not the only area where there's quality. We like a lot of healthcare stocks. We like a lot of cyclicals and industrials, frankly, too. Or we like some of those state-old consumer branded companies. And we are probably tilting our portfolio toward that side of quality more than what you'd get if you ran sort of a naive quality screen, let's say, on the kind of characteristics you mentioned. Another way to think about that, there's diversification. There's also valuation. Of course, some of those non-tech areas are not quite as loved as the tech sector is today.
Yep. Tom, great to speak with you. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Tom Hancock of GMO. That investment by NVIDIA into OpenAI, part of both AI giants' race to build out data centers. Mackenzie Sagalis is live from one of those OpenAI data centers in Abilene, Texas. Mac.
Mel, Sam Altman's AI ambitions on full display